Blood trickled down Zoe Williams's wrist as two uniformed officers dragged her through the crowded terminal of Atlanta International Airport. Their grip tightened with each of her words, metal handcuffs cutting deeper into her dark skin. All around them, passengers froze in their tracks. Phones rose in unison, dozens of strangers recording the scene in stunned silence. A 17-year-old black girl in handcuffs, her wrists bleeding, yet her eyes remained calm, her dignity somehow intact despite the humiliation. That's her, announced Heather Donovan, a blonde woman in her mid-30s wearing a crisp Meridian Airlines uniform. She stood behind the officer's arms, crossed, a satisfied smirk playing across her lips. She was being aggressive on board. We had no choice. Aggressive. That single word echoed through the terminal like a slap. It was the word that had been used for generations to justify cruelty against people who had done nothing wrong except exist while black. Zoe's voice stayed steady, cutting through the chaos. I have a valid ticket. I was seated quietly. I did nothing wrong. Each word was measured, controlled, even as the officers yanked her forward. What none of those recording bystanders could possibly know was that this moment, this public humiliation captured on dozens of phones, would soon flip the entire aviation industry upside down. Because the teenager they were dragging through that terminal wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of Xavier Williams, founder and CEO of Meridian Airlines, one of the largest commercial flight networks in America. And the moment she picked up the phone, justice would take flight. A middle-aged woman in a business suit whispered to her companion, "This is disgusting. What did that poor girl do?" "Nothing," replied an elderly man who had witnessed everything. "She was just sitting there when they accused her of stealing a laptop. I saw the whole thing." As the officers pushed Zoe toward a security office, her gaze remained forward, her shoulders straight despite the pain. She had been taught her entire life that the world would not see her brilliance first, it would see her skin. But she had also been taught something else: dignity cannot be handcuffed. Little did Heather Donovan know that in less than 24 hours, she would be the one facing questions, and Meridian Airlines would never be the same again. 6 hours earlier, morning sunlight had streamed through the windows of a modest but elegant townhouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. Zoe Williams stood before her mirror, smoothing the collar of her neatly pressed white blouse. Her natural hair was pulled back in a professional style, and her dark eyes reflected a determination beyond her 17 years. On her bed lay an open backpack meticulously organized with color-coded folders, printed research papers, and presentation slides stored in a protective case. The title page was visible: Next Generation Propulsion Systems Efficiency Innovations for Commercial Aviation. This was no ordinary high school project. This was Zoe's ticket to Harvard University's prestigious aerospace engineering program, her dream since she was 9 years old. "You've got this," came a deep, warm voice from her doorway. Xavier Williams leaned against the frame, watching his daughter with undisguised pride. At 48, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something significant from nothing. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, but he wore no flashy jewelry, no designer labels screaming wealth. Few people outside the aviation industry would recognize Xavier Williams on sight, and that was exactly how he wanted it. As the founder and CEO of Meridian Airlines, he had built a commercial aviation empire worth billions, yet he had deliberately kept his face off magazine covers and his name out of society pages. "I know, Dad," Zoe replied, though her fingers nervously adjusted her blouse again. "The interview's at 5 p.m. I've rehearsed my presentation 12 times. Xavier smiled. "That's not what I'm talking about. You've got this because you're brilliant and because you've earned every opportunity through your own merit." He stepped into the room and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "Remember what I always tell you. Respect can't be demanded. It must be earned." Zoe recited the familiar words, comforting her. "But never let anyone take yours away." Unlike other CEOs who flaunted their success through their children, Xavier had raised Zoe without the trappings of privilege. No private jets, no chauffeurs, no elite private schools where her last name would open doors. He wanted her to understand that her worth came not from his power, but from her own effort and character. When Zoe had won the regional robotics championship last year, she'd done so with a team from her public high school, using parts they'd scrounged and saved for. When she'd earned perfect SAT scores, she'd done it through late nights studying after her volunteer shifts at the local science center. The Harvard scholarship interview was the culmination of years of genuine work. "When the world looks at you," Xavier said softly, his expression growing more serious, "they may not see your brilliance first. They'll see your skin. So stay proud, stay composed no matter what." Zoe nodded. At 17, she thought she understood what her father meant. She did, but not yet how deeply she would need to draw on that lesson today. "Your mom would be so proud," Xavier added, his voice catching slightly. Carmen Williams had died from cancer when Zoe was just 9, but her spirit lived on in their home, in the books she'd loved that still filled their shelves, in the vintage flight manuals she'd collected, in the passion for aviation she'd instilled in both her husband and daughter. "I know," Zoe whispered. She picked up her mother's pilot wings pin. Carmen had been one of the first black female commercial pilots for a major airline and fastened it to her blazer, not as a symbol of nepotism, but as a private talisman of strength. Xavier checked his watch. "I need to head to the office. The board meeting starts in an hour." He hesitated. "I could still have the company jet take you to Boston." Zoe shook her head firmly. "No special treatment, remember. That was our deal. I fly commercial like everyone else." Xavier laughed. "Stubborn just like your mother." His expression softened. "One small compromise, I did book you first class. Not for status, but for safety. I sleep better knowing you're comfortable traveling alone." "Fine," Zoe conceded with a smile. "But only because it makes you feel better." Neither of them could have imagined how that small compromise, that simple first-class ticket, would change everything in just a few hours. The first crack in Zoe's perfect morning appeared at the check-in counter. While white passengers ahead of her were processed efficiently, barely glancing up from their phones, the gate agent, a thin-lipped woman with rectangular glasses, spent nearly 5 minutes examining Zoe's identification. "Is there a problem?" Zoe asked politely, maintaining the pleasant smile her father had taught her was sometimes necessary armor. "Just verifying," the woman replied curtly, eyes flicking between Zoe's face and ID with obvious suspicion. Finally, she reluctantly printed the boarding pass, sliding it across the counter with barely concealed disdain. Zoe maintained her composure, thanking the woman anyway. She'd learned to stay graceful even when people weren't. But as she walked toward security, she noticed something unusual, a small red mark in the corner of her boarding pass, a symbol she'd never seen before on previous flights. It looked like a flag, a code of some kind. She studied it for a moment, then tucked the boarding pass into her pocket, dismissing it as some new security feature. She didn't know yet that the small red mark would follow her through every checkpoint that day. Random screening announced a TSA officer as Zoe reached the front of the security line. Of course, Zoe was the only one pulled aside from a group of at least 20 passengers. The random selection felt anything but random. "Arms out, please," instructed a female officer, her tone flat and impersonal. Zoe complied, watching as her carefully packed bag was pulled aside for additional inspection. Each item was removed one by one. Her presentation notes examined her laptop, swabbed for explosive residue. Even her natural hair patted down roughly by gloved hands. All around her, dozens of white passengers walked through the scanner and collected their belongings without a second glance from security personnel. A blonde girl, approximately Zoe's age, breezed through with a large tote bag that received only a cursory scan. Zoe felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the physical manifestation of being treated differently, but kept her father's voice in her head. Don't let them decide who you are. She remained silent, cooperative, even as the officer roughly flipped through her Harvard application materials. Engineering. The officer commented, a note of surprise in her voice. Interesting choice. Zoe couldn't tell if the statement contained genuine interest or skepticism, so she simply nodded. Aerospace engineering, yes. After nearly 15 minutes of additional screening, Zoe was finally allowed to proceed. She carefully reorganized her bag, making sure her presentation materials remained in perfect order. Her hands worked methodically while her mind processed what had happened. This wasn't the first time she'd experienced this kind of treatment, but something felt different today, more targeted, more deliberate. First the prolonged ID check, then the mysterious mark, now the random screening. "Excuse me," she heard a voice behind her. Turning, she saw an older black man in a business suit watching her with knowing eyes. "You okay?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you," Zoe replied with a small smile. He nodded, his expression communicating what words couldn't. "Keep your head up. Their problem, not yours." Zoe nodded gratefully and continued toward her gate. The man's small gesture of solidarity strengthened her resolve. She would not let this minor unpleasantness distract her from the important day ahead. By the time she reached Gate C-27, the boarding line for Meridian Airlines Flight 1427 was already forming. Zoe checked her ticket and smiled at the seat assignment, 2A first-class window seat. Though she had initially protested her father's insistence on first class, she now felt a small sense of relief. Perhaps the front of the plane would provide a reprieve from the scrutiny she'd faced so far. She didn't yet realize that her seat assignment would become the catalyst for everything that followed. Now, boarding our first-class passengers for Meridian Airlines Flight 1427 to Boston, announced the gate agent, her voice crisp over the speaker system. Zoe took a deep breath, gathered her belongings, and stepped into the priority boarding line. The weight of her presentation materials reminded her why she was making this trip. Focus on Harvard, she told herself. Nothing else matters today. She presented her boarding pass to the agent, who barely glanced at it before waving her through. Zoe walked confidently down the jet bridge and into the aircraft cabin, the familiar smell of recycled air and new upholstery greeting her. She made her way toward the front of the plane, looking for seat 2A. The first-class cabin gleamed with subtle luxury, wider leather seats, increased legroom, small touches of elegance that separated it from the economy section. Zoe found her window seat and carefully stored her backpack in the overhead compartment, keeping only her small notebook for the flight. She had just settled into her seat, buckling her seatbelt, when a shadow fell across her. Looking up, she met the cold gaze of a middle-aged white man in an expensive charcoal suit. His face was flushed with indignation, his mouth set in a hard line. "Excuse me," he said loudly, not to Zoe but to the flight attendant passing behind him. "I paid for first class." Heather Donovan, whose name badge identified her as the lead flight attendant, rushed over immediately. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor as she approached, a customer service smile already in place. "Of course, sir. Let me help you," Heather said warmly, checking his boarding pass. "Mr. Bennett, welcome aboard." "Is there a problem?" Richard Bennett pointed at Zoe. "I believe there's been a mistake. That's my seat." Heather glanced at Zoe and her smile vanished instantly. Her expression shifted from warm hospitality to cold suspicion in a heartbeat. "You're in this seat?" she asked flatly. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2A," Zoe replied evenly, presenting her boarding pass. Heather barely glanced at it. "That's impossible. You must have been upgraded by mistake." She turned back to Bennett. "Mr. Bennett's ticket shows 2A. There must be a computer error." Zoe noticed several passengers had begun watching the interaction. Some had even taken out their phones, sensing conflict. The pressure of those eyes burned into her back, but she kept her tone calm and reasonable. "Ma'am, there's clearly a mistake. My boarding pass clearly shows 2A. Perhaps we could check the system." "Don't quote policy to me," Heather interrupted sharply. "Take a seat in economy or step off the plane. We're already running behind schedule." The humiliation stung deeper than words. Zoe had done nothing wrong. She had a valid ticket for this seat. Yet here she was being told she didn't belong. For a brief moment she considered calling her father, letting him resolve the situation with one phone call. But that wasn't who she was. That wasn't how Xavier had raised her. "I understand," Zoe said quietly, gathering her notebook. She stood feeling the eyes of the entire first-class cabin on her. "Is there a specific seat I should take in economy?" Heather didn't answer already, turning her attention back to Bennett with a renewed smile. "I'm so sorry for the confusion, sir. Can I offer you a complimentary beverage while we sort this out?" As Zoe made her way to the back of the plane, she passed through the narrow aisle of economy class, searching for an empty seat. She heard Heather whisper to another flight attendant just as she passed the galley, "I don't want her kind up here anyway." That sentence, "her kind," was the match that lit the fire. 5 simple words that revealed everything about the situation. This wasn't about seating assignments or computer errors. This was about something much older and uglier. Zoe found an empty middle seat between 2 passengers who shifted uncomfortably as she sat down. Through the thin curtain separating the cabins, she could see Bennett settling into her seat, accepting a glass of champagne with a self-satisfied smile. She took a deep breath and opened her laptop, determined to review her Harvard presentation one more time. The screen glowed with her carefully designed slides on propulsion systems. Work had always been her refuge, her way of proving herself beyond any doubt. But today, even that small comfort would be stolen from her. Zoe sat squeezed between 2 strangers who seemed determined to claim both armrests, leaving her to balance her laptop on her knees in the cramped middle seat. The passenger to her right, a businessman in his 40s, kept glancing at her screen with undisguised curiosity. "That looks complicated," he commented, nodding toward her presentation slide about fuel-efficient engine designs. "It's for a scholarship interview," Zoe explained politely, angling the screen slightly away from his view. "Huh. Good luck with that," he replied, the surprise in his voice betraying his low expectations. Zoe returned to her work, trying to ignore the discomfort of her surroundings. Through the thin curtain, she could see Richard Bennett enjoying the spacious seat that should have been hers, sipping champagne while browsing a financial magazine. The injustice of it burned, but she forced herself to focus on her presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence," the captain's voice announced over the intercom. "Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened." The plane dipped suddenly, causing several passengers to gasp. Zoe's laptop slid forward off her knees despite her attempt to catch it landing with a clatter in the aisle. Before she could unbuckle to retrieve it, Heather Donovan appeared, bending to pick up the computer. Her expression hardened as she looked at the open screen showing Harvard's logo and Zoe's name. "Whose is this?" she asked loudly, holding the laptop up like evidence at a trial. "Mine," Zoe said, reaching for it. It fell during the turbulence. Heather pulled the laptop back slightly, examining it. "You sure looks expensive." The implication was clear and cutting. How could someone like Zoe afford such a device? The businessman beside her shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Heather turned toward a white passenger across the aisle, a middle-aged man who had been watching the interaction with interest. "Sir, is this yours by any chance?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was performing a valuable service. The man, later identified as Lucas Kennedy, hesitated visibly. His eyes darted between Zoe's face and Heather's expectant expression. Something in Heather's look seemed to communicate what she wanted him to say. "I think so," he finally replied, though uncertainty laced his voice. "Yes, it looks like mine." Zoe's jaw dropped. "That's not true. It's mine. My name is literally on the screen." Heather's eyes narrowed as she glanced at the screen, then at Zoe. "Young lady," she said coldly, You can explain that to security. We take theft very seriously on this aircraft. Theft. Zoe's voice rose slightly before she caught herself conscious of how any emotional display would be perceived. This is my laptop. I can prove it's mine. I have the password, the registration. We have a problem here, Heather announced dramatically to the surrounding passengers, many of whom were now openly staring. This passenger may have stolen property in her possession. That's absurd, came a voice from across the aisle. A Hispanic woman in her late 20s leaned forward, frowning at Heather. I've been watching. That laptop fell from her lap during turbulence. It's obviously hers. Ma'am, please stay out of this, Heather replied tersely. This is a security matter. The Hispanic woman, Elena Rodriguez, according to the conference badge hanging around her neck, shook her head in disbelief. I'm recording this, she said, raising her phone. This doesn't seem right. Heather's face flushed with anger. She turned and walked briskly toward the front of the plane, still carrying Zoe's laptop. Through the cabin, Zoe could hear her speaking urgently into the crew phone. Captain, we need to report a security threat. A chill ran down Zoe's spine. Security threat. For a dropped laptop. The situation was spiraling beyond anything she could have imagined. Elena leaned across the aisle toward Zoe. This is ridiculous. What's your name, Zoe Williams? I'm Elena. Don't worry, I've got this all on video. This isn't right. Zoe nodded gratefully, but inside anxiety bloomed. Her Harvard interview was in less than 6 hours, and her presentation was on that laptop. More importantly, her dignity was being stripped away piece by piece in front of a plane full of strangers. She took a deep breath, centering herself. What would her father do in this situation? What would her mother have done? Stay calm, stay dignified, but never accept injustice. That was the Williams family way. Little did Heather know that her actions had just set in motion the largest discrimination case in aviation history. And it would begin with a single simple phone call. The aircraft suddenly began its descent, the change in altitude causing passengers to look around in confusion. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, a male voice announced over the intercom. Due to a security concern, we're making an unscheduled stop at Raleigh-Durham International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Zoe's heart pounded in her chest, but externally she remained composed, hands folded in her lap, breathing measured and even. Elena Rodriguez continued recording her phone trained on the aisle. This is insane, Elena muttered. All over a laptop that clearly belongs to you. 20 tense minutes later, the plane touched down smoothly and taxied to a remote part of the airport. Through her window, Zoe could see police vehicles with flashing lights waiting on the tarmac. The cabin door opened and 4 uniformed airport police officers boarded, their expressions grim. Heather Donovan met them at the front, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing toward the back of the plane. That's her, Heather said loudly as she led the officers down the aisle, pointing directly at Zoe. She became confrontational when caught with stolen property. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man with a crew cut, looked down at Zoe. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. I haven't done anything wrong, Zoe stated clearly, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. That's my laptop. I can prove it's mine. You can explain at the security office, the officer replied. Please stand up and come with us. Zoe unbuckled her seatbelt and stood dignified and controlled. I'll cooperate fully, but I want to state clearly that this is a misunderstanding. The officer nodded, then gestured for her to move into the aisle. As Zoe stepped forward, she felt a sudden rough grip on her arm. Hands behind your back, a second officer ordered, yanking her arm backward with unnecessary force. Wait, Zoe began, but before she could finish, her wrists were being wrenched behind her back. Cold metal handcuffs snapping around them, tightening until they bit into her skin. Please, she whispered, wincing at the pain. "The cuffs are too tight and I'm cooperating. Stop resisting." The first officer snapped, though Zoe hadn't moved. "She's not resisting," Elena protested loudly, half rising from her seat. "This is excessive force." All around the cabin, passengers were reacting. Some gasped in shock. Others filmed with their phones. A few called out in protest. "She's just a kid," someone shouted. "Why is she in handcuffs?" demanded another. An elderly woman near the front stood up despite the seatbelt sign. "This isn't right. She didn't do anything." Heather's face reddened. "Please return to your seats. This is a security matter." The officers began marching Zoe toward the exit, gripping her arms so tightly she could feel bruises forming. As they moved, the metal cuffs cut deeper into her wrists, and Zoe felt a warm trickle of blood running down her hand. "The handcuffs are cutting me," she said quietly to the officer beside her. "I'm bleeding." He glanced down, saw the blood, but made no move to adjust the restraints. Instead, they quickened their pace, pushing her forward through the first-class cabin. As they passed Richard Bennett, he averted his eyes, suddenly fascinated by the view outside his window. When they reached the terminal, the scene became even more humiliating. The bustling airport came to a standstill as travelers stopped to watch a handcuffed teenage girl being escorted by 4 large officers. Phones emerged everywhere, capturing her walk of shame. Blood now dripped visibly from her wrist, leaving small crimson spots on the polished floor. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation burning through her. This was the moment when Zoe truly understood what her father had tried to prepare her for all these years. As they approached a security office, Zoe saw Heather Donovan trailing behind them, still clutching the laptop like a trophy. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Zoe's calm facade nearly broke. Not from fear or pain, but from the realization that this woman had deliberately targeted her from the moment she boarded. "Get her inside," ordered a supervisor waiting at the security office door, "and someone take her statement." As the door closed behind them, cutting off the airport audience, Zoe straightened her shoulders despite the pain in her wrists. "I would like to make a phone call," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "And I would like these handcuffs removed as I am bleeding and have shown no resistance whatsoever." The supervisor looked at her bleeding wrists and finally nodded to the officers. "Remove the cuffs. Get her a first aid kit." He turned to Zoe. "One phone call. Make it quick." As the cuffs were removed, revealing raw, bloodied skin underneath, Zoe flexed her fingers to restore circulation. They handed her a phone, and with steady hands, she dialed a number she knew by heart. When the line connected, she spoke 4 simple words that would change everything. "Dad, it's Meridian Airlines." The small interrogation room in the airport security office was sterile and cold, furnished only with a metal table and 3 chairs. Zoe sat alone, a bandage hastily wrapped around her wounded wrist, her eyes fixed on the clock on the wall. 45 minutes had passed since her brief phone call to her father. Outside the room, she could hear raised voices, though the words were muffled by the heavy door. One of the security officers had gone pale after checking her identification more thoroughly, suddenly realizing the potential implications of their actions. The door swung open and a senior airport security official entered, followed by one of the officers who had arrested her. Their demeanor had changed dramatically. "Ms. Williams, there seems to have been a misunderstanding." The official began, his tone noticeably more respectful. "We've verified that the laptop is indeed registered to you." "Yes, I'm aware of that," Zoe replied evenly. "I stated that fact multiple times before being handcuffed and dragged through a public terminal." The officer shifted uncomfortably. The handcuffs were standard procedure for what exactly? Zoe interrupted, her composure intact, but her words precise and cutting. What was the specific charge that required physical restraint resulting in these? She held up her bandaged wrists. Neither man had an adequate response. "I'd like to make another call," Zoe continued, "and I'd like my laptop returned immediately." "Of course," the official said quickly. "And you're free to go at any time. We apologize for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Zoe repeated softly, letting the inadequacy of the word hang in the air. "I don't think that's the correct term for what happened today." They provided her with a phone again, and this time she called Xavier directly. He answered on the first ring. "Zoe, are you all right?" His voice was controlled but tense. "I'm physically fine," she answered, conscious of the listening ears around her. "They've removed the handcuffs and bandaged my wrists. They're now saying I'm free to go." "Stay exactly where you are," Xavier instructed. "Michael Lawson and I are 20 minutes out. They contacted us directly after realizing who you are, who I am. Don't sign anything. Don't make any further statements." "I've missed my Harvard interview," Zoe said, her voice finally betraying a hint of emotion. "Harvard can wait," Xavier replied. "This is more important. Gabriella is already working on documenting everything. The videos are all over social media." Videos, Zoe hadn't considered how quickly the footage might spread. Multiple passengers filmed everything. Justice for Zoe is already trending. There was a pause. "Zoe, listen to me. What they did was wrong on every level. This isn't about who I am or who you are. This is about basic human dignity. I know Dad. We'll be there soon. Michael is already in contact with the authorities. They're scared, as they should be." His voice softened. "I'm proud of how you've handled this, Zoe. Your mother would be too." After ending the call, Zoe sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. She thought about her Harvard interview now missed. She thought about the eyes of the passengers watching her humiliation. Most of all, she thought about Heather Donovan's words, "I don't want her kind up here anyway." Her kind. As if her mere existence was an intrusion in a space where she didn't belong. 22 minutes later, the door opened again. Xavier Williams entered, his tall figure commanding immediate respect. Behind him followed Michael Lawson, Meridian Airlines head of legal affairs, already taking notes on a tablet. Xavier's eyes immediately went to Zoe's bandaged wrists, and a flash of controlled anger crossed his face before he composed himself. He embraced his daughter briefly, then turned to face the security officials who had followed them in. "My daughter will be providing a complete statement about today's events," Xavier stated, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. "But first, I want to speak with the flight attendant who initiated this incident." "Mr. Williams, we understand your concern," began one official. "No, you don't," Xavier interrupted calmly. "You don't understand the magnitude of what has happened here today. My 17-year-old daughter was publicly humiliated, physically restrained to the point of bleeding, and paraded through an airport on fabricated charges while flying on my airline." The emphasis on the last two words caused visible discomfort among the officials. Michael Lawson stepped forward. "We'll need the names of every officer involved, body camera footage, surveillance video, and the name of the Meridian employee who escalated this situation. We're also requesting all radio communications and written reports. And we need them now." Xavier added his tone, making it clear this wasn't a request. As the officials scrambled to comply, Xavier turned back to Zoe, his public persona dropping for a moment to reveal a father's concern. "Are you really okay?" he asked quietly. Zoe nodded, finding strength in her father's presence. "I am now." "Good," Xavier replied. "Because this isn't over, not by a long shot." While Xavier and Michael remained with Zoe at the airport, Meridian Airlines headquarters in Atlanta had transformed into a crisis command center. Gabriela Hernandez, the company's chief operations officer, stood in the executive conference room surrounded by screens displaying social media feeds, flight data, and news reports. Her normally composed demeanor had given way to focused intensity. "I want every piece of information about Flight 11427, she ordered, addressing the team of executives gathered around the table. "Passenger manifests, crew assignments, boarding procedures, everything." Andrew Parker, The company's VP of Public Relations was already fielding calls from major news networks. "The story's gone viral," he reported, holding his hand over his phone's microphone. "CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they're all running with it. The videos are everywhere." "What videos exactly?" Gabriella asked, turning to the social media monitoring team. A young analyst pulled up several clips on the main screen. "We've identified at least 14 different passenger recordings so far. The most viewed one shows Zoe being handcuffed and dragged through the terminal with blood visible on her wrists. It has over 3 million views already and climbing." The room fell silent as they watched the footage. Zoe's dignified composure, despite her obvious humiliation, made the images even more powerful and disturbing. "My God," whispered someone at the table. Gabriella's jaw tightened. "And this happened on our aircraft. Under our brand." "Yes," confirmed the head of flight operations. "It was our plane, our staff. The flight was operated directly by Meridian, not a regional partner." Andrew Parker set down his phone, his expression grim. "We need to get ahead of this immediately. I suggest a statement expressing shock, promising an investigation." "No," Gabriella interrupted firmly. "No corporate doublespeak. Not this time." She turned to face the entire room. "Xavier was clear. We own this completely. No deflection, no carefully crafted PR statements designed to distance ourselves. This happened on our watch to our CEO's daughter, but we need to mitigate the damage to the brand Andrew protested." "The brand." Gabriella's eyes flashed. A 17-year-old girl was publicly humiliated and physically harmed while flying our airline because of the color of her skin. "This isn't about brand management. This is about human decency and accountability." The door opened and a young analyst rushed in, tablet in hand. "Ms. Hernandez, we found something. The red mark on Zoe's boarding pass. It's part of an unofficial coding system some check-in agents have been using." "What kind of coding system?" Gabriella asked sharply. "It appears to be used to flag certain passengers for additional scrutiny. We're still gathering data, but preliminary analysis shows a disproportionate application to passengers of color, especially in first class." The revelation sent a wave of stunned silence across the room. "Who authorized this system?" Gabriella demanded. "That's the thing," the analyst replied. "It's not in any official manual or training. It seems to have developed unofficially among certain staff members." Gabriella turned to the head of HR. "I want a complete audit of every employee involved in this flight from check-in to cabin crew. Background performance reviews, complaint history, everything." "Already underway," the HR director confirmed. "And we've identified the lead flight attendant who initiated the incident. Heather Donovan, 5 years with the company, transferred from customer service to flight operations 3 years ago." Another analyst raised her hand. "I've been looking into the passenger who claimed Zoe's laptop was his Lucas Kennedy. He's not just a random passenger. He's a consultant for Pinnacle Airways." Pinnacle. Gabriella's eyes narrowed. "Our main competitor." "Yes, and there's more. Heather Donovan previously worked for Pinnacle before joining Meridian. She and Kennedy appear in several company event photos together from that time. The implications were becoming clear. This might not have been a simple case of discrimination, but something more coordinated." Gabriella's phone buzzed with a text from Xavier Grounding, "All flights for 24 hours, effective immediately. Prepare the announcement." She looked up at the shocked faces around the table. "Xavier is grounding the entire fleet. Every Meridian flight worldwide, effective immediately. That will cost millions," Andrew Parker exclaimed. "Yes," Gabriella agreed, "and it sends a message that some things are more important than money. We're calling it a comprehensive safety and ethics review." She turned to the head of operations. "Draft the protocol for a controlled grounding of all aircraft. Passengers already in transit will continue to their destinations, but no new departures. Full refunds for everyone affected." As the executives dispersed to execute their assignments, Gabriella remained in the conference room studying the still image of Zoe's face on the screen, composed, dignified, yet clearly in pain. She thought about her own teenage daughter and felt a surge of both anger and determination. Her phone rang. Xavier calling from the airport. "Gabriella, what have you found?" he asked without preamble. "It's worse than we thought," she replied. "There appears to be an unofficial profiling system in place, and there may be connections to Pinnacle Airways. The passenger who claimed Zoe's laptop works for them, and so did Heather Donovan previously." There was a long pause on the line. "This isn't just about Zoe anymore," Xavier finally said, his voice controlled but tight with anger. "No," Gabriella agreed. "This is about something much bigger, and we're going to fix it." The grounding announcement. "Being prepared now. All flights worldwide for 24 hours. Good," Xavier said. And Gabriella, "Yes, when this is over, Meridian will be a different airline. I promise you that." As she ended the call, Gabriella looked again at the frozen image of Zoe on the screen, blood trickling down her wrist. Dignity intact despite everything. In that moment, she knew Xavier was right. After today, nothing would be the same again. The security office door opened with controlled force as Xavier Williams entered, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the room. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and a precisely tailored suit, he carried himself with the confident authority of someone accustomed to being in charge. But it was his eyes, sharp-focused and now burning with controlled fury, that truly commanded respect. Behind him followed Michael Lawson, Meridian's head of legal affairs, whose typically calm demeanor had been replaced by professional intensity. He carried a leather portfolio and a tablet already documenting everything. The airport security officials straightened instinctively, recognition dawning on their faces as they realized exactly who had just walked into their domain. The senior officer stepped forward, hand extended in an attempt at professional courtesy. "Mr. Williams, I'm Chief Harris. We're handling this situation with the utmost." Xavier ignored the outstretched hand, his attention focused entirely on Zoe. He crossed the room to where she sat, immediately noticing the white bandage wrapped around her wrist, now spotted with small blooms of red where blood had seeped through. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his public persona momentarily set aside. "I'm okay, Dad," Zoe replied, her voice steady despite everything. Xavier gently took her injured wrist, examining the bandage with a tightness around his mouth. When he looked up, the control in his expression was even more pronounced, not the absence of anger, but its perfect containment. "Who put handcuffs on my daughter?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The room fell silent. The officers exchanged glances, none wanting to claim responsibility. "I asked a question," Xavier continued, each word precise and measured. "Who placed restraints on a cooperative 17-year-old girl tightly enough to break skin?" Finally, an officer near the back raised his hand slightly. "Sir, it was standard procedure for..." "For what?" Xavier interrupted. "For a false accusation of laptop theft that could have been disproven in 30 seconds, for the crime of sitting in first class while black." The officer had no response. Xavier turned to Chief Harris. "I want the names and badge numbers of every officer involved in this incident. I want all body camera footage preserved immediately, and I want the Meridian Airlines employee who initiated this situation in this room within the next 5 minutes." "Mr. Williams, we understand your concern as a parent," Chief Harris began, "but there are procedures. I'm not here as her father right now," Xavier stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm here as the owner of the airline you just disgraced." The words landed like a physical force. Chief Harris's eyes widened slightly as the full implications sank in. Now Xavier continued. "Zoe will receive proper medical attention for her injuries, and then she will provide a complete statement with her legal representative present. In the meantime, Michael will collect all relevant documentation and evidence." Michael Lawson stepped forward, tablet in hand. We'll need all security footage, radio communications, written reports, and the names of everyone involved in today's incident, including the Meridian flight crew. Xavier returned his attention to Zoe, his expression softening slightly. You handled this with extraordinary dignity. I need to step out to make some calls, but Michael will stay with you. As Xavier turned to leave, the door opened again, and Heather Donovan was escorted in by an airport security officer. She still wore her Meridian Airlines uniform, though her previously confident demeanor had vanished. When she saw Xavier, her face paled visibly. Miss Donovan, Xavier acknowledged coldly. I believe you've already met my daughter Zoe. Heather's eyes darted between Xavier and Zoe, the realization of her situation dawning in real time. Mr. Williams, I had no idea that she was my daughter, Xavier finished for her, and that would have made a difference in how you treated her. No, I just meant, I know exactly what you meant, Xavier interrupted. And that's the problem. That's why, effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties pending a full investigation. He stepped closer to her, his voice dropping so only she could hear. You humiliated a young woman simply because of how she looked. You judged her, demeaned her, and put her in physical danger based on nothing but your own prejudice. That's not just poor customer service, Ms. Donovan. That's a fundamental failure of human decency. Heather's face crumpled. Sir, please, I was just following what Xavier challenged. Because it certainly wasn't Meridian Airlines policy. We'll find out exactly what you were following in the investigation. With that, he turned back to Zoe. I'll be right outside. Michael will ensure everything is handled properly from here. As Xavier exited the room, airport staff scattered before him, suddenly intensely focused on their duties. In the corridor, he paused, took a deep breath, and made the call that would change the aviation industry forever. Gabriella, he said, when the line connected ground every plane. Effective immediately. The executive offices of Meridian Airlines at Raleigh-Durham International Airport had never seen such activity. Within an hour of Xavier's arrival, the conference room had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Maps of flight routes covered one wall, social media monitors displayed real-time reactions on another, and the central table was strewn with legal documents and tablets. Xavier stood at the head of the table, his suit jacket removed and sleeves rolled up, reviewing information with laser focus. Zoe sat nearby, her wrist now properly treated by a physician Xavier had summoned. Michael Lawson was coordinating with their legal team while 2 security officers guarded the door. Mr. Williams announced one of the assistants, James Wilson, is here. Xavier looked up. Send him in. James Wilson, Meridian's regional manager for the Southeast Division, entered the room with visible apprehension. At 50, with silver-streaked hair and an expensive suit, Wilson typically projected confidence. Today, however, he looked like a man anticipating his own execution. Xavier, he began attempting to establish familiarity. This unfortunate incident. Sit down, James Xavier instructed, his tone leaving no room for debate. Wilson complied immediately, glancing nervously at Zoe, then back to Xavier. Let's be clear about something, Xavier continued. What happened today wasn't an unfortunate incident. It was a catastrophic failure of leadership training and basic human decency within my airline. I completely agree, Wilson rushed to say. Heather Donovan's actions were inexcusable, and she'll be terminated immediately. This isn't about one flight attendant, Xavier replied evenly. This is about structural issues that allowed someone like Heather Donovan to believe her actions were acceptable, even expected. Xavier slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a security image showing Zoe's boarding pass with the red mark clearly visible. Explain this, Xavier demanded. Wilson's complexion paled. I'm not familiar with any marking system. That's interesting, Michael Lawson interjected, consulting his notes. Because we've already interviewed 3 check-in agents who confirmed this unofficial flagging system has been in use for at least 2 years. They were trained on it during their orientation. Wilson swallowed hard. If such a system exists, it was implemented without my knowledge or approval. The door opened again, and a young Hispanic woman in a Meridian uniform entered, escorted by Gabriela Hernandez, who had just arrived from headquarters. "This is Sofia Torres," Gabriela introduced her. "Customer service supervisor who's been trying to report discriminatory practices for 18 months. Sofia stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. "Mr. Williams, I've submitted 6 formal complaints about the marking system and selective treatment of minority passengers. Each one was marked resolved in the system with no action taken." Xavier looked at Wilson. "Care to revise your statement?" James Wilson's facade crumpled. We were under tremendous pressure to maintain efficiency metrics. The marking system was just meant to identify potential security risks. Based on what criteria, Xavier's voice had dropped dangerously low. Wilson didn't answer. "I've seen enough," Xavier stated. "James, your employment with Meridian is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." As Wilson was led away, Gabriela stepped forward with her tablet. "There's more, Xavier. We've been analyzing the crew assignments and passenger complaints. Heather Donovan has been selectively placed on flights with high-profile minority passengers for the past 8 months. "By whom?" Xavier asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Gabriela replied. "The crew assignments were manually overridden by someone with executive access." Michael Lawson looked up from his documents. "And we've confirmed that Richard Bennett, the passenger who took Zoe's seat, is a consultant for Pinnacle Airways. He specifically requested Flight 11427 just yesterday after most of the first-class cabin was already booked." Xavier's expression darkened as the pieces began falling into place. This wasn't random. No, Gabriela agreed. "This looks coordinated." Sofia Torres cleared her throat. "Mr. Williams, there's something else you should know. Heather Donovan regularly communicates with someone at Pinnacle. I've overheard her on the phone in the crew lounge mentioning passenger information." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about one incident of discrimination, this was corporate espionage and sabotage. Xavier turned to Zoe, who had been listening quietly. "What do you think?" Zoe considered for a moment. "This isn't just about me, is it? They've been doing this to other people. Lots of other people." "I believe so, yes," Xavier confirmed. "Then I think we need to expose all of it," Zoe said firmly. "Not just punish the individuals involved, but change the entire system." Xavier nodded, pride evident in his eyes. He turned back to the team. "Michael, prepare legal actions against Pinnacle Airways for corporate espionage and civil rights violations. Gabriela, accelerate our fleet grounding. I want every Meridian plane on the ground within 4 hours, not 24. The financial impact will be enormous," Gabriela warned. "Some things are more important than money," Xavier replied. "We'll call it a comprehensive ethics review effective immediately." He picked up his phone and dialed. "Andrew, I need you to prepare a press conference for 5 p.m. today. No, not a statement, a full conference. Zoe and I will both be speaking." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'm aware of the risks. Do it anyway." As he ended the call, Xavier turned to the room at large. "Today, we're not just responding to a crisis. We're fundamentally redefining what Meridian Airlines stands for." Sofia Torres stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Williams, what happens to people like me who've been reporting these issues?" Xavier considered her for a moment. "Ms. Torres, how would you feel about heading a new passenger advocacy department with direct reporting to the executive level?" Sophia's eyes widened. I would be honored." "Good." Xavier nodded. "Because we're going to need people with your courage and principles for what comes next." The corporate chess game had begun. But unlike most corporate battles fought in boardrooms with spreadsheets and stock prices, this one had started with a bleeding wrist and a stolen seat, and would end with nothing less than industry-wide transformation. By mid-afternoon, the videos of Zoe's treatment had ignited a firestorm across social media platforms. The most viewed clip taken by Elena Rodriguez showed the moment the handcuffs cut into Zoe's wrists, blood visibly trickling down her hand as she maintained her composure. The contrast between her dignity and the excessive force used against her created a powerful narrative that resonated deeply. #Justice for Zoe trended at #1 worldwide with over 2 million tweets in just 3 hours. Celebrity activists shared the videos calling for accountability. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning Meridian Airlines. News helicopters circled the airport broadcasting live footage of the growing media encampment outside Meridian's offices. In the privacy of a quiet office, Zoe scrolled through her phone, overwhelmed by the public reaction. Her name and face were everywhere. Supportive messages flooded in, but so did unwanted attention and scrutiny. Some commentators questioned what she must have done to provoke such a response. Others debated whether her father's position made her story more or less valid than other instances of discrimination. "It's a lot to process," Xavier said gently, observing his daughter from the doorway. Zoe looked up. "I never wanted to be the face of anything. I just wanted to go to my Harvard interview." Xavier sat beside her. "I know, and I'm sorry this happened to you. If you want to step back from all this, just say the word. We can handle the media without your direct involvement." Zoe thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No. If this happened to me with all my advantages, your position, our resources, what happens to people who don't have that protection? I need to speak up." Xavier nodded with pride. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But first, there's something you should see." He pulled up a news segment on his tablet. On screen, Jonathan Brooks, the silver-haired CEO of Pinnacle Airways, was giving a statement to reporters. While the footage is certainly concerning, Brooks was saying smoothly, "It's important to remember that we're only seeing part of the story. Meridian Airlines has strict protocols for passenger safety, and their employees don't take actions like this without cause. I would caution against rushing to judgment before all facts are known." Xavier paused the video. He's trying to control the narrative, subtly suggesting you must have done something to deserve what happened. "But Pinnacle isn't even involved," Zoe pointed out. "Why is he commenting at all?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Xavier replied. "And I think we're starting to find answers." A knock at the door interrupted them. Michael Lawson entered, tablet in hand. "You need to see this," he said, pulling up another news clip. This one showed a different interview with Brooks, who was now suggesting the Williams family might be leveraging a misunderstanding for publicity. "The man has audacity, I'll give him that," Xavier remarked darkly. "There's more," Michael continued. "Alexis Morgan from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has been investigating Pinnacle for months. She believes they've been systematically targeting minority-owned businesses for corporate sabotage, including Meridian. She wants to meet," Michael added. "Says she has evidence that could help us understand what happened today." Xavier considered this. "Set it up, but quietly." Zoe had been quiet, scrolling through more reactions on her phone. "Dad, I think I need to say something myself. People are arguing about me about what happened, but they haven't heard directly from me." Xavier looked concerned. "The PR team is preparing your statement for the press conference." "No," Zoe interrupted gently. "Something from me. Unscripted. Real." She showed him her phone where she'd already drafted a simple post. "Today I experienced something that too many people face daily. I'm physically okay. My wrists will heal. But the deeper wound being treated as inherently suspicious because of my skin is one that millions know too well. I don't want special treatment because of who my father is." I want equal treatment for everyone, regardless of who their father is. #Justice. For Zoe isn't just about me. Xavier read it carefully, then handed the phone back. It's perfect. Zoe posted it, and within minutes, the message was shared thousands of times, adding a personal voice to the viral videos. Meanwhile, in Pinnacle Airways' executive offices, Jonathan Brooks was in the middle of an emergency meeting when his assistant burst in. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, urgently turning on the office television. On-screen breaking news banners announced Meridian Airlines grounds entire fleet for comprehensive ethics review, following discrimination incident. The camera cut to a Meridian spokesperson. CEO Xavier Williams has ordered all Meridian flights worldwide to return to their gates. No new departures will be authorized for the next 24 hours, while we conduct a thorough review of our practices and policies. Full refunds will be issued to all affected passengers. Brooks slammed his fist on the table. "He's turning this into a virtue signal. Call Thomas immediately." As Brooks seethed, the news anchor continued. Meridian stock has actually risen 3% since the announcement, with analysts suggesting that Williams's decisive action demonstrates a commitment to values that may strengthen customer loyalty long term. The corporate chess game had just escalated dramatically. While Brooks was playing for quarterly profits, Xavier was playing for generational change, and the world was watching. The Meridian Airlines data center hummed with activity as Gabriela Hernandez led a team of analysts through the company's internal systems. Large screens displayed flight manifests, crew assignments, customer complaints, and employee communications. This wasn't just an investigation, it was an excavation of the company's operational DNA. "Show me the pattern analysis again," Gabriela instructed, focusing on a matrix of flight data. A young data scientist expanded a visualization across the main screen. "We analyzed 2 years of passenger complaints cross-referenced with demographic data and crew assignments. The clustering is statistically significant." The display showed a clear pattern. Complaints about discriminatory treatment were concentrated among specific flight crews and routes. More disturbingly, these incidents spiked whenever high-profile minority business travelers were booked in premium cabins. "And the red flagging system?" Gabriela asked. "It appears to have started as a legitimate security protocol 3 years ago," explained another analyst, "but was gradually repurposed. The original documentation shows it was meant for passengers with security restrictions or special handling needs. Over time, it evolved into something very different." Gabriela frowned. "Who modified the protocol?" "That's where it gets interesting," the analyst continued. "The changes were approved by multiple managers over time, including James Wilson, but the initial pivot came from Thomas Reynolds." Gabriela's eyes narrowed. "Xavier's former mentor." "The same, before he left Meridian for Pinnacle Airways 2 years ago." Gabriela absorbed this revelation with growing concern. Reynolds had been Xavier's early supporter, helping him secure initial funding for Meridian. His departure for Pinnacle had been amicable on the surface, positioned as a retirement followed by a consulting role. Now it appeared there might have been more to the story. The door opened and Xavier entered with Michael Lawson. "What have we found?" Xavier asked, surveying the data displays. Gabriela gestured to the screens. "A deliberate pattern of discrimination against minority passengers, particularly in first class. And Thomas Reynolds appears to be at the center of it." Xavier's expression darkened. "Thomas, are you certain the evidence is compelling?" Gabriela confirmed. "He initiated the changes to the flagging system before leaving for Pinnacle, and since then the discriminatory practices have accelerated. We've also discovered something disturbing about flight assignments," added a human resources analyst. Certain flight attendants, including Heather Donovan, were specifically scheduled on flights with high-profile minority passengers. The override authorizations came through Thomas Reynolds' old credentials, which apparently remained active in our system. Xavier absorbed this information silently, the betrayal evident in his eyes. "There's more," continued the HR analyst. We've been interviewing staff, and multiple employees have come forward with stories of being instructed to provide additional scrutiny to passengers who don't look like they belong in first class." "Who gave those instructions?" Michael Lawson asked. "A group of supervisors who all report to regional managers like Wilson. They called it maintaining the Meridian standard." Xavier turned to Michael. "How many discrimination complaints have we received over the past 2 years?" Michael consulted his tablet. 217 officially filed complaints, but our initial analysis indicates many more incidents likely went unreported. "And how many resulted in substantive action or changes?" Xavier pressed. 3, Michael replied grimly. "The rest were dismissed, marked as resolved, without action, or buried in bureaucratic procedures." A heavy silence fell over the room as the magnitude of the systemic failure became clear. "We've also identified something concerning in our hiring patterns," Gabriella added. "After Thomas left for Pinnacle, he recommended several employees who subsequently transferred to Meridian, including Heather Donovan and 2 other flight attendants involved in similar incidents. Plants," Xavier concluded. "He was embedding people loyal to him within our operation." "It appears so," Gabriella agreed. "And they've been systematically undermining our service quality, particularly for minority passengers." Xavier turned to the window, looking out at the grounded Meridian aircraft visible on the tarmac. Each one bore his company's logo, a stylized wing meant to symbolize freedom and possibility. Now those same planes had become instruments of humiliation for people who looked like him, like his daughter. "This goes beyond Zoe's incident," he said, finally turning back to the team. "This is about the fundamental integrity of what we built. Thomas knew how personal this company is to me, how much it represents my values and vision. This wasn't just business for him. This was betrayal." "What do you want to do?" Gabriella asked. Xavier's response was immediate and resolute. "Everything. I want every employee interviewed, every complaint reopened and properly investigated, every policy examined and rebuilt if necessary." He paused. "And I want a complete security audit of our systems. If Thomas could maintain access after leaving, who else might have back doors into our operation?" "That will take time," Michael cautioned. "Then we keep the fleet grounded until it's done," Xavier stated firmly. "I don't care about the cost. I care about getting this right." As the team dispersed to execute his instructions, Xavier remained for a moment studying the data visualization that clearly showed the pattern of discrimination within his airline. "This ends now," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "And it ends permanently." The internal investigation had revealed more than just isolated incidents. It had uncovered a coordinated effort to undermine Meridian's integrity from within. What had begun as one humiliating incident involving his daughter had exposed a far more insidious problem, and Xavier Williams was now determined to solve it no matter the cost. Rain drummed against the windows of the private meeting room in downtown Raleigh as Xavier Williams waited a cup of untouched coffee cooling before him. The hotel suite had been chosen for its discretion. No connection to Meridian Airlines, no obvious security, nothing to attract attention. The door opened and Alexis Morgan entered, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. At 33, the investigative journalist had already earned a reputation for thorough, uncompromising reporting on corporate misconduct. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a weathered leather messenger bag that had clearly seen many such clandestine meetings. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Mr. Williams." She began settling into the chair across from him. "I've been working on this story for nearly 6 months, but recent events have accelerated my timeline." "What story exactly?" Xavier asked, studying her carefully. Alexis opened her bag and removed a sealed envelope. "This is everything I have on Pinnacle Airways' targeted campaign against minority-owned businesses in the aviation and hospitality sectors. Meridian isn't their only target, but you're definitely their primary focus." Xavier opened the envelope and began reviewing its contents, internal memos, financial records, email excerpts, and photographs documenting a coordinated effort far beyond what he had imagined. "This memo," Xavier said, holding up a particular document. "Where did you get it?" "A whistleblower inside Pinnacle's executive offices," Alexis replied. Someone who couldn't stomach what they were seeing anymore. The memo in question, dated 6 months earlier, outlined a strategy called Traditional Standards Initiative, with the stated goal of maintaining aviation's legacy client base and traditional service standards. The subtext was clear to anyone reading between the lines: make minority passengers uncomfortable enough that they would choose other airlines, particularly in premium cabins. Jonathan Brooks has been privately vocal about what he calls changing demographics threatening luxury standards, Alexis explained. He believes catering to diverse clients will drive away his core customer base of wealthy white travelers. Xavier continued reviewing the documents, his expression darkening. "Thomas Reynolds is mentioned repeatedly here." "Yes," Alexis confirmed. "He appears to be the operational architect of much of this. His position as your former mentor gave him unique insights into Meridian's vulnerabilities." Xavier set the documents down, processing this betrayal. Thomas had been more than a business associate. He had been a trusted friend who had championed Xavier when few others would. His defection to Pinnacle had seemed like a simple career move at the time. Now it appeared to have been the first step in a calculated attack. "There's something else," Alexis continued, pulling out her tablet. "I've been tracking these incidents across multiple airlines, and there's a pattern of targeting high-profile minority passengers, particularly business leaders and celebrities." She showed Xavier a database of incidents similar to what had happened to Zoe minority passengers removed from flights, subjected to excessive security checks, or bumped from premium cabins despite valid tickets. "They're creating a hostile environment by design," Alexis explained. "The goal isn't just to inconvenience individual travelers, but to send a message about who belongs in these spaces." Xavier nodded grimly. "Make enough people feel unwelcome, and eventually they stop coming." "Exactly. And it's working. My data shows a measurable decline in minority business travelers booking premium cabins on affected routes." Xavier leaned back, connecting this new information with what Meridian's internal investigation had already uncovered. The red flagging system, the selective crew assignments, the targeted customer service issues. It's all part of this. "Yes, but Zoe's incident was different," Alexis noted. "That was direct, personal, and deliberately provocative. Previous incidents maintained plausible deniability." Xavier's eyes narrowed. "You think they knew exactly who she was?" "I think they were counting on it," Alexis confirmed. "My sources suggest Pinnacle is facing financial pressure. Their last 2 quarters have underperformed. They need something dramatic to change the competitive landscape, and if I reacted exactly as I did, grounding the fleet, launching investigations, they could portray you as emotionally unstable, overreacting because your daughter was involved. Their narrative would be that you're putting personal feelings above business responsibilities." Xavier considered this. A calculated gamble on their part, with significant potential upside for them. Your stock would drop, theirs would rise, and they could position themselves as the stable traditional alternative. Xavier examined another document, this one showing Thomas Reynolds meeting with Richard Bennett and Heather Donovan 3 weeks earlier. So these weren't just bad employees, they were operatives. "Effectively, yes," Alexis agreed. "Placed strategically to execute this campaign from within your organization." Xavier was silent for a long moment, processing the scope of the conspiracy. What had happened to Zoe wasn't an isolated incident or even a series of unfortunate coincidences. It was a deliberate strategy executed over months by people he had once trusted. "Why are you sharing this with me?" he finally asked. "This could be a career-making expose for you." Alexis met his gaze directly. "Because this isn't just about corporate competition or stock prices. This is about whether we're going to allow spaces to be systematically made hostile to people based on their race, and because I believe you'll actually do something about it, not just issue a statement and move on." Xavier nodded slowly. "I appreciate your candor, Ms. Morgan. What will you do with this information?" she asked. "First, verify it independently," Xavier replied. "Then use it not just to defend Meridian, but to force fundamental change across the industry." He gathered the documents, his resolve strengthening. "Brooks and Reynolds didn't just attack my company. They attacked my family, and through that they attacked every family that looks like mine. That requires more than a defensive response. They'll fight back," Alexis warned. "They have connections throughout the industry, and they'll try to paint this as a vendetta." "Let them," Xavier said simply. "Some fights are worth having regardless of the cost." As their meeting concluded, Xavier had one final question. "When do you plan to publish your findings?" "I've been holding back gathering more evidence," Alexis admitted. "But after what happened to Zoe, I can't justify waiting. I'm filing the story tomorrow." Xavier nodded. "Good. The world needs to see this for what it really is." As he left the meeting, Xavier called Gabriella. "I need you to accelerate our plans," he instructed. "Pinnacle isn't just competing with us. They're trying to fundamentally undermine everything we stand for. And I need to speak with Zoe immediately. She needs to understand what she's really part of now." The conspiracy was larger and more insidious than anyone had initially suspected. What had begun as an incident of discrimination against one young woman had revealed a coordinated campaign to systematically exclude people of color from premium travel experiences. But in targeting Xavier Williams' daughter Pinnacle had made a critical miscalculation. They had assumed he would respond as a CEO protecting his company. Instead, they were about to face a father defending not just his daughter, but his entire community. While Xavier confronted the corporate conspiracy, Zoe Williams sat cross-legged on the hotel room bed, surrounded by printed articles, social media screenshots, and her ever-present laptop. Her bandaged wrists were a constant reminder of what had happened, but rather than retreating from the trauma, she had channeled it into action. "Look at this pattern," she explained to Elena Rodriguez, who had reached out after the incident and had since become an unexpected ally. "It's not random at all." On her laptop screen, Zoe had created a detailed spreadsheet tracking incidents of passenger removals complaining using data from social media posts, news reports, and first-hand accounts she had gathered through an online form she created. "I found 78 documented cases in the last year alone," Zoe continued. "And those are just the ones that generated some public attention. The actual number is likely much higher." Elena, who worked in data analytics for a tech company, studied the pattern recognition algorithms Zoe had applied to the dataset. "This is impressive work, especially considering you put it together in less than 48 hours. "I couldn't sleep anyway," Zoe admitted. And it helped to focus on something productive. Her Harvard interview, the reason for her flight in the first place, had been rescheduled, but Zoe's priorities had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a personal humiliation had evolved into something much more significant, a call to action. "The hashtag is gaining serious traction," Elena noted, scrolling through Twitter on her phone. Hashtag flying. "While Black has over 5 million mentions now." Zoe nodded. "It's giving people a platform to share experiences they've previously kept private. Many thought they were isolated incidents, but now they're seeing it's part of a pattern." A knock at the door interrupted them. A hotel staff member delivered a package which Zoe opened to find a sleek new laptop, a replacement from her father, for the one still being held as evidence despite being proven to be hers. As she set up the new computer, Zoe's phone chimed with a message request from someone named Daniela Morales. The profile showed a young Hispanic woman about Zoe's age. Curious, Zoe accepted the connection. "I saw what happened to you," Daniela's message read. "The same thing happened to me on Pinnacle Airways 3 months ago. They accused me of stealing someone else's ticket for a first-class seat. I was on my way to a scholarship interview to MIT Engineering." Zoe immediately video called her, and soon the two teenagers were sharing remarkably similar experiences. "They made me feel like I didn't belong there," Daniela explained, her voice still carrying traces of hurt. Like the idea of me in first class was so impossible it had to be fraud. What did you do after Zoe asked? Nothing, Daniela admitted. I was too embarrassed, and my parents said it wouldn't make a difference to complain. She paused. But seeing you stand up, seeing how you maintained your dignity through the whole thing, it made me realize I should have spoken up. This conversation catalyzed something in Zoe. That evening, with Elena and Daniela's help, she launched a simple website called Equal Skies. The site featured a secure form where people could report discriminatory experiences in air travel, a database of documented incidents and resources for travelers facing discrimination. Within hours, submissions flooded in, hundreds of stories from travelers who had faced similar treatment, but had never had a platform to share their experiences or connect them to a larger pattern. This is becoming bigger than just Meridian or Pinnacle, Elena observed as they watched the submission counter climb past 300 by midnight. This is industry-wide. It has to be addressed industry-wide too, Zoe replied, determination evident in her voice. Individual incidents can be dismissed as misunderstandings or isolated employee misconduct, but data at this scale can't be ignored. Late that night, Xavier returned from his meeting with Alexis Morgan to find Zoe still working, surrounded by notes and data visualizations. You should be resting, he said, gently concerned about her still healing wrists. I'll rest when we fix this, Zoe replied without looking up from her laptop. Dad, look what we've built. She showed him the Equal Skies platform and the hundreds of submissions already collected. Xavier's expression shifted from concern to profound pride as he scrolled through the site. You created all this in one day. Elena helped with the database architecture, and Daniela designed the submission form, Zoe explained. I just connected the dots. Xavier sat beside his daughter, studying the patterns she had identified. This is extraordinary, Zoe. You've done something that could change the entire industry conversation. That's the plan, she replied with quiet determination. I've been thinking about my Harvard presentation too. Your interview is rescheduled for next week, Xavier reminded her. I know, but I'm completely revising my proposal, Zoe explained. Instead of just focusing on engine efficiency, I'm developing a concept for algorithmic detection of bias in service industries. She showed him preliminary sketches for a system that would analyze booking patterns, service incidents, and complaint resolutions to identify potential discrimination in real time. The same engineering principles apply. Zoe continued, her eyes bright with purpose. It's still about identifying inefficiencies in a system, just different kinds of inefficiencies. Xavier studied his daughter with a mixture of pride and wonder. In the midst of personal trauma, she had transformed her pain into purpose with remarkable speed and clarity. You know, he said thoughtfully, when I founded Meridian, I wanted to build an airline that represented the best of what aviation could be, connecting people, breaking down barriers, making the world more accessible. And now, Zoe asked. Now I realize we need to rebuild it from the ground up, Xavier admitted, and what you're doing here could be the foundation. Zoe's phone chimed again, another submission to the database. This one included a video clip of a black businessman being removed from a first-class lounge despite having valid credentials. This isn't just about our experience anymore, Zoe said quietly. This is about changing the system for everyone. As father and daughter worked late into the night analyzing patterns and planning next steps, the Equal Skies initiative continued to grow. What had begun as one teenager's response to humiliation was rapidly evolving into a movement that would ultimately force the aviation industry to confront its deeply rooted prejudices. And in her quiet, methodical way, Zoe Williams was proving that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't loud protest, but careful, irrefutable documentation of the truth. The executive floor of Pinnacle Airways buzzed with frantic energy as Jonathan Brooks paced the length of his corner office, phone pressed to his ear. The morning's headlines had blindsided him. Aviation's hidden bias investigation reveals industry-wide discrimination. Meridian CEO's daughter launches Equal Skies. Initiative Pinnacle Airways implicated in targeted harassment campaign. Alexis Morgan's expose had hit with the force of a hurricane backed by documents, data, and testimonials that painted a damning picture of systematic discrimination orchestrated at the highest levels of Pinnacle's management. "I don't care what it takes," Brooks snapped into the phone. "I want that story discredited, and I want it done yesterday." He paused, listening to the response from his crisis management team. "No, we categorically deny everything. This is a vendetta by Xavier Williams, nothing more." As he hung up, Thomas Reynolds entered the office, his usual composed demeanor noticeably frayed. "The board is demanding answers, Jonathan." "Then give them some," Brooks retorted. "Tell them it's a coordinated attack orchestrated by our primary competitor. Tell them Morgan is biased and her sources are unreliable." "And the internal memos she quoted," Reynolds asked. "The ones with both our names on them?" Brooks slammed his fist on the desk. "Fabricated or taken out of context. We maintain customer service standards, nothing more." "It won't be that simple," Reynolds warned. "The Equal Skies database already has over 2,000 submissions. The patterns are irrefutable, and many incidents involve our airline specifically." Before Brooks could respond, his assistant interrupted through the intercom. "Sir Nicholas Grant from Meridian's board is on line 1. Brooks and Reynolds exchanged glances. Nicholas Grant was Meridian's largest external investor, a traditional businessman known for prioritizing profits over principles. Nicholas Brooks greeted smoothly, putting the call on speaker. "What can I do for you? You can tell me what the hell is going on?" "Jonathan Grant," replied his voice tight with tension. "Williams has grounded our entire fleet for 48 hours now. The financial impact is enormous." "I understand your concern," Brooks said. "Xavier is clearly letting personal emotions cloud his business judgment. His daughter had an unfortunate experience." "Don't patronize me," Grant interrupted. "I've seen the videos and read Morgan's report. This goes far beyond one incident. Surely you don't believe these baseless accusations?" "What I believe," Grant continued coldly, "is that Meridian's stock has actually risen since the grounding announcement, while Pinnacle's has dropped 12% since the opening bell." Brooks checked his terminal and saw with alarm that Grant was correct. Investors were responding positively to Xavier's decisive action and the values it represented. "Williams is calling an emergency board meeting this afternoon," Grant continued. "I thought you should know that several major investors, including myself, are standing with him." "You can't be serious," Brooks sputtered. "This will cost millions in lost revenue." Perhaps, Grant acknowledged, but the alternative, being on the wrong side of this issue, will cost far more in the long run. "Times are changing, Jonathan. Adapt or get left behind." The call ended, leaving Brooks and Reynolds in stunned silence. "We need to contain this," Brooks finally said. "Call Bennett and Donovan. Tell them to deny everything, claim they were following standard procedures." "Bennett's not answering," Reynolds admitted. "And Donovan has already been approached by Meridian's legal team. They're offering immunity in exchange for her full testimony about our involvement." The corporate warfare was escalating by the hour, but the battlefield had shifted in an unexpected direction. Instead of a struggle over market share and profit margins, the fight had become about values, accountability, and the future of the industry itself. Across town, Xavier Williams convened Meridian's emergency board meeting in a secure conference room. The atmosphere was tense but purposeful as he laid out his comprehensive plan. The Open Skies initiative consists of 3 primary components, Xavier explained to the assembled board members. First, complete transparency. We publicly release all data on passenger complaints broken down by demographics with quarterly external audits. He clicked to the next slide. Second, structural reform. We overhaul training, hiring practices, and advancement criteria to eliminate bias at every level of our operation. Nicholas Grant leaned forward. And the third component, industry-wide standards, Xavier replied. We will not resume normal operations until we have commitments from airports, security agencies, and other airlines to adopt these same practices. We're not just fixing Meridian, we're transforming the entire passenger experience. That's extremely ambitious, commented another board member. Other airlines will resist. Then they'll be left behind, Xavier stated firmly. The data Zoe has collected through Equal Skies shows this isn't unique to us. It's an industry-wide problem that requires an industry-wide solution. Speaking of Zoe, Grant interjected, I understand she's scheduled to speak at tomorrow's press conference. Is that wise given her age and the sensitivity of the situation? Xavier's expression remained resolute. It was her decision, and I support it fully. Zoe has become the face of this issue not because she's my daughter, but because she handled an unjust situation with extraordinary dignity and then channeled that experience into creating meaningful change. As the board meeting continued, Gabriela Hernandez entered with breaking news. Pinnacle's stock has fallen 15% now. They've just announced that Richard Bennett has been terminated for violations of company policy. Scapegoating Xavier commented, trying to contain the damage by sacrificing the most visible player. There's more, Gabriela continued. The Department of Transportation has announced a formal investigation into discriminatory practices in the airline industry, citing both the Zoe Williams incident and the Equal Skies database as catalysts. A murmur ran through the boardroom. Government involvement elevated this from a corporate issue to a regulatory one with potential industry-wide implications. One last item Xavier added, bringing the meeting back to focus. I've been contacted by CEOs from 3 other airlines expressing interest in joining the Open Skies initiative. They recognize that this is a watershed moment for aviation. As the meeting concluded, Nicholas Grant approached Xavier privately. I owe you an apology, he admitted. When you first announced the fleet grounding, I thought you were overreacting because it was your daughter. And now, Xavier asked. Now I see you weren't reacting strongly enough, Grant replied. What happened to Zoe was just the visible part of a much larger problem. I'm glad she had the courage to speak up, and I'm glad you had the conviction to listen. The corporate warfare continued to escalate, but the terms of engagement had fundamentally changed. What Pinnacle had intended as a targeted campaign against a competitor had instead sparked a movement for accountability that was rapidly spreading beyond any single company's ability to control. And at the center of it all was a 17-year-old girl who had transformed her humiliation into a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes the most effective weapon in corporate warfare isn't market strategy, but moral clarity. Rain pelted the windows of Sofia Torres's modest apartment as she paced nervously, glancing repeatedly at the clock. It was nearly midnight, but sleep was impossible given what she was about to do. A soft knock at the door made her jump. She checked the peephole before opening it to reveal Heather Donovan soaked from the rain and looking nothing like the confident flight attendant who had humiliated Zoe Williams just days earlier. Her makeup-free face showed the strain of sleepless nights, and her shoulders sagged with the weight of her decisions. You came? Sophia said, stepping aside to let her in. I didn't have much choice, Heather replied, removing her wet coat. My face is everywhere. I can't go back to my apartment. Journalists are camped outside. You brought what I asked for? Sophia pressed. Heather nodded, producing a flash drive from her purse. Everything. The emails, the meeting recordings, the passenger flagging protocol. It's all there. Sophia took the drive, examining it as if it might vanish. Why now, Heather? After all this time enforcing their policies. Heather sank into a chair, eyes fixed on the floor. Because I saw her face. Not just on the plane, but afterward in all those videos. She looked right at me with such dignity. No screaming, no threats. Just this calm certainty that what was happening was wrong. She looked up, tears forming. And suddenly I couldn't pretend anymore that what we were doing was about standards or protocols. It was cruel, and I was part of it. Sophia nodded, understanding the complicated path to this revelation. What did Thomas tell you when he recruited you to transfer to Meridian? That I'd be maintaining proper standards in premium cabins, that Meridian was lowering the bar by catering to... Heather paused, ashamed. To people like me, Sophia finished for her. People of color who somehow don't belong in first class. Yes, Heather admitted quietly. He said customers were complaining that the traditional experience was being diluted. It made sense at the time, or I convinced myself it did. And the targeting of specific passengers that started about 6 months ago. We would receive special handling lists before flights with certain names flagged. We were told they were potential security or service issues. Like Zoe Williams. Heather nodded. Her name was specifically added to our flight manifest the day before. We were told to watch for unusual behavior and document everything. Sophia checked her watch. The lawyers will be here soon. Are you sure you want to do this? Once you testify, there's no going back. I'm sure, Heather said firmly. What happens to me doesn't matter anymore. This has to stop. 30 minutes later, Michael Lawson arrived with 2 members of Meridian's legal team. For the next 3 hours, they documented Heather's testimony about the coordinated campaign orchestrated by Thomas Reynolds and implemented by staff at both Pinnacle and Meridian Airlines. She described in detail how employees were trained to question delay and inconvenience minority passengers in premium cabins without leaving evidence of explicit discrimination. The red flag system started as a legitimate security protocol, Heather explained, but Thomas repurposed it. He called it passenger experience protection, a way to identify customers who might disrupt the premium atmosphere. And the criteria for these disruptions, Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. It was never stated explicitly, Heather admitted, but in practice it meant flagging passengers of color, especially in first class or business cabins. The most damning revelation came when Heather described a meeting 3 weeks earlier, where Thomas Reynolds and Richard Bennett had specifically discussed Xavier Williams' daughter. They knew she was flying to Harvard for an interview. They knew which flight. And they made sure I was assigned to that cabin with explicit instructions to find a reason to move her to economy, Heather confessed. Bennett was planted to create the conflict over her seat. Michael's expression remained professional, but his knuckles whitened around his pen. And the laptop accusation improvised but consistent with our training. We were taught to question possessions that seemed inconsistent with the passenger profile. By dawn, Heather had signed a comprehensive statement detailing years of discriminatory practices, names of involved employees, and specific instances of targeted harassment. In exchange, Meridian offered limited immunity from civil liability, though criminal charges remained a possibility depending on the DOT investigation's findings. As the legal team prepared to leave, Heather asked a question that had been troubling her. What happens now? Now, Michael explained, you become witness number 1 in what will likely be the largest civil rights case in aviation history. Across town, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Xavier Williams received a secure file containing Heather's complete testimony. He reviewed it in his hotel suite, while Zoe slept in the adjoining room, finally resting after days of nonstop work on the Equal Skies initiative. The testimony confirmed everything they had suspected and more. This wasn't just about bias or individual prejudice. It was a calculated campaign to preserve what Thomas Reynolds had called aviation's traditional character by making minority passengers feel unwelcome in premium spaces. Xavier called Gabriela Hernandez despite the early hour. You've seen Donovan's statement. Yes, Gabriela confirmed. It changes everything. This is no longer just our word against theirs. Contact the Department of Transportation immediately, Xavier instructed. They need to see this before our press conference today. Already done, Gabriela replied. And Xavier documents are leaking from inside Pinnacle now. Employees are coming forward sharing internal communications. The whole thing is unraveling. Good, Xavier said simply. It's time for the truth to come out. Later that morning, as Zoe prepared for the press conference, she scrolled through the Equal Skies platform on her tablet. The database had grown to over 3,000 submissions, each representing a person who had faced discrimination similar to her own experience. "Are you nervous?" Xavier asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "No," Zoe replied thoughtfully. "I was nervous about my Harvard interview. This is different. This is necessary." Xavier studied his daughter, marveling at her composure and clarity of purpose. "You know, when I started Meridian, I thought building a successful airline was my life's achievement. Now I realize my greatest achievement is sitting right here." Zoe smiled. "We're not done yet, Dad." "No," Xavier agreed. "We're just getting started." As they prepared to leave for the press conference, breaking news flashed across the television. Pinnacle Airways executive Thomas Reynolds placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The turning point had arrived. What had begun as one teenager's humiliation had catalyzed a fundamental reckoning within an industry that had allowed discrimination to become standard operating procedure. And now, with Heather Donovan's testimony and the mounting evidence from the Equal Skies platform, denial was no longer an option. The wheels of justice, so often slow to turn, had suddenly found momentum. And for Zoe Williams, watching the story unfold, there was a profound realization. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't outrage or vengeance, but simply ensuring that the truth once revealed cannot be buried again. The grand ballroom of the Raleigh Convention Center hummed with anticipation as journalists from around the world assembled for what had been billed as a major announcement regarding the future of commercial aviation. Television cameras lined the back wall, satellite trucks crowded the parking lot, and social media correspondents jockeyed for position near the front. Behind the stage, Xavier Williams conferred with his executive team one last time. Gabriela Hernandez reviewed the presentation slides while Michael Lawson briefed Xavier on last-minute developments. Pinnacle's stock has fallen another 8% since the opening bell, Michael reported. Brooks is holding an emergency board meeting as we speak. "And the DIOT's response to Heather's testimony?" Xavier asked. "They've upgraded their investigation to a formal inquiry with subpoena power," Michael confirmed. "They're taking this very seriously." In an adjacent room, Zoe sat quietly reviewing her notes. She had insisted on speaking despite Xavier's initial concerns about putting her in the spotlight. Now, seeing her calm determination, he knew it was the right decision. This was her story to tell. Andrew Parker, VP of Public Relations, entered with final instructions. "We're at capacity, over 300 journalists, plus live streams reaching millions. Stick to the plan." Xavier opens. Zoe shares her experience, then Gabriela presents the Open Skies initiative. "Any word from Pinnacle?" Xavier asked. "Rumors that Brooks might make a surprise appearance," Andrew replied. "Security is prepared." Xavier nodded, then turned to Zoe. "Ready?" "Ready," she confirmed, smoothing her blazer, a professional navy blue with her mother's pilot wings pinned to the lapel. At exactly 2:00 p.m., they walked onto the stage together. The room erupted with camera flashes and the frantic scribbling of notes. Xavier approached the podium first, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady and resolute. 3 days ago, my 17-year-old daughter Zoe boarded a Meridian Airlines flight to attend a scholarship interview at Harvard University. She had a valid first-class ticket, proper identification, and conducted herself with perfect courtesy. Xavier paused, letting the silence emphasize his next words. She was then subjected to humiliation, false accusations, and physical harm, resulting in bleeding wrists, not because of anything she did, but because certain individuals decided that a young black woman did not belong in first class. The room remained captivated as Xavier continued. What happened to Zoe was not an isolated incident. It was not a misunderstanding. and it was not the action of a few rogue employees. It was the predictable result of a culture that has normalized discrimination under the guise of maintaining standards. He gestured to the screen behind him, which displayed a map of the United States, overlaid with thousands of points representing incidents documented through the Equal Skies Initiative. Each of these points represents a passenger who experienced similar treatment. Different airlines, different airports, different circumstances, but the same underlying message: some people don't belong in certain spaces because of how they look. Xavier's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Today, I am not speaking as the CEO of Meridian Airlines. I am speaking as a father whose daughter was harmed, as a black man who has experienced this treatment myself, and as a human being who believes that the dignity of every person is non-negotiable. He turned toward Zoe. I would now like to introduce someone who has shown extraordinary courage and grace in the face of injustice. My daughter, Zoe Williams. Zoe approached the podium, her bandaged wrists visible as she adjusted the microphone. The room fell completely silent. 3 days ago, she began, her voice clear and steady. I was dragged through an airport in handcuffs because someone decided I didn't belong in first class. My crime was existing in a space where someone thought I shouldn't be. She recounted the events methodically, the red flag on her boarding pass being forced from her seat, the false accusation of theft, the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. Throughout her account, she maintained the same composure she had shown during the incident itself. What happened to me was painful and humiliating, Zoe continued. But what makes it truly unacceptable is that it happens every day to people who don't have the platform I have. People who don't have a father who owns an airline. People whose stories go untold and whose dignity is violated without consequence. She gestured to her tablet, which displayed the Equal Skies website. That's why I created this platform, not for myself, but for everyone who has been made to feel they don't belong. Every submission represents a person who deserves the same respect I do, regardless of their name or position. As Zoe continued speaking, a commotion at the back of the room drew attention. Jonathan Brooks had arrived with Thomas Reynolds. Both men in immaculate suits, their expressions tense but controlled. Xavier noticed them immediately but gave no indication, allowing Zoe to continue uninterrupted. This confrontation had been inevitable. What we're calling for today isn't special treatment, Zoe emphasized, unaware of the new arrivals. It's equal treatment. It's the simple acknowledgement that dignity isn't a luxury amenity available only to certain passengers. She concluded with quiet power. This isn't about one flight, one airline, or one person. This is about creating a world where no one is made to bleed because someone decided they don't belong. The room erupted in applause as Zoe stepped back from the podium. Xavier returned, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder before addressing the crowd again. Today, Meridian Airlines is launching the Open Skies Initiative, he announced, a comprehensive program to transform not just our company, but the entire aviation industry. As Xavier outlined the initiative's core components: transparency, accountability, industry-wide standards, Brooks and Reynolds moved closer to the stage, their presence increasingly noticeable. When Xavier opened the floor for questions, the first came from a journalist near the back. Mr. Williams, Jonathan Brooks from Pinnacle Airways is here. Would you be willing to address him directly? A hush fell over the room as Xavier paused, then nodded. Of course. Mr. Brooks is welcome to join us. All eyes turned to Brooks as he made his way to a microphone in the center aisle. The confrontation that had been building for days was finally happening live before a global audience. Mr. Williams Brooks began, his voice professionally cordial but strained. While I sympathize with your daughter's experience, don't you think? Grounding an entire airline and launching this very public campaign is an overreaction driven by personal emotion rather than business judgment. Xavier regarded him steadily. Mr. Brooks, if ensuring that passengers aren't physically harmed, falsely accused, or humiliated based on their appearance, is an overreaction, then perhaps the problem lies in how normalized discrimination has become in our industry. Brooks persisted. You're making sweeping accusations against the entire industry based on one unfortunate incident. One incident, Xavier raised an eyebrow. The Equal Skies database has documented over 3,000 similar experiences. Heather Donovan has provided sworn testimony about coordinated efforts to target minority passengers, and leaked documents from your own company outline strategies to maintain what you call traditional standards by making certain passengers feel unwelcome. The room buzzed as journalists frantically took notes. Brooks's face tightened. Those documents are being taken out of context, he insisted. Pinnacle Airways categorically denies any discriminatory intent or practices. Xavier didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to Zoe. Would you like to address Mr. Brooks directly? The room fell silent again as Zoe stepped forward. She studied Brooks for a moment, then spoke with remarkable composure. Mr. Brooks, 3 days ago, I was accused of stealing a laptop because someone couldn't believe it belonged to me. I was handcuffed until I bled because I didn't look right in first class. Your employee Richard Bennett participated in this. Your former employee Heather Donovan orchestrated it, and your executive Thomas Reynolds planned it. She paused, letting her words sink in. You can deny it. You can contextualize it. You can call it an unfortunate incident. But data doesn't lie, and the pattern is clear. This isn't about one flight, it's about an industry that has normalized treating people differently based on how they look. Brooks had no immediate response, clearly unprepared for Zoe's direct address. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically. A 17-year-old girl was holding one of the most powerful executives in aviation accountable on live television. Xavier reclaimed the podium. The Open Skies initiative isn't just about Meridian or Pinnacle. It's about creating a new standard for the entire industry. Airlines can either join us in establishing these standards voluntarily, or they can wait for regulators and customers to force the issue. He looked directly at Brooks. The choice is yours, Jonathan. You can continue defending practices that are increasingly indefensible, or you can join us in building an industry where dignity isn't determined by appearance. As the press conference continued, the confrontation that had been building for days had finally materialized. But instead of the corporate showdown Brooks had anticipated, he found himself facing not just a powerful CEO, but a poised young woman whose dignity and determination had transformed a personal humiliation into a movement for change. And in that moment, it became clear that the old ways of doing business, of containing scandal, managing perception, and preserving traditional standards were giving way to something far more powerful: the simple, undeniable truth about how people deserve to be treated. The atmosphere in the press room shifted as Zoe Williams stepped forward to deliver her address. What journalists had expected to be a standard corporate response to controversy was transforming into something far more powerful, a first-hand account from the young woman at the center of the storm. Zoe adjusted the microphone, her bandaged wrists visible beneath the sleeves of her navy blazer. The crowd fell silent. Cameras focused intently on her composed face. Despite being just 17, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what needed to be said. 3 days ago, she began, her voice clear and steady. I boarded a Meridian Airlines flight to attend a scholarship interview at Harvard University. I had a valid first-class ticket, proper identification, and I conducted myself with perfect courtesy. She paused briefly, making eye contact with various journalists in the room. What followed was a sequence of events that no passenger should ever experience. I was removed from my assigned seat without cause. I was accused of stealing my own laptop. I was handcuffed so tightly that my wrists bled, and I was paraded through a public terminal like a criminal, all because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged in first class. Zoe gestured to her wrists. These injuries will heal. The humiliation of that moment will fade. But what cannot and should not be forgotten is that my experience is not unique. She turned to the large screen behind her, which displayed the Equal Skies website with its growing database of reported incidents. In the 72 hours since I launched Equal Skies, over 3,000 people have shared similar experiences. Different airlines, different airports, different circumstances, but the same underlying message: some people don't belong in certain spaces because of how they look. Zoe navigated to specific testimonials, highlighting several on the screen. A surgeon removed from first class because the flight attendant didn't believe she was a real doctor. A tech executive accused of using a stolen credit card while checking in for a business class flight. An elderly couple made to verify their boarding passes 6 times before being allowed into the premium lounge. These aren't anecdotes or exceptions, Zoe continued. They form a pattern that reveals something deeply troubling about our transportation systems. The data shows that these incidents aren't random. They disproportionately affect travelers of color, particularly in premium cabins. Her voice remained measured, but her words carried unmistakable conviction. What makes this issue particularly insidious is its invisibility to those who don't experience it. Each incident can be explained away as a misunderstanding, a security concern, or an isolated employee's poor judgment. But when you see thousands of similar experiences across different airlines and airports, the pattern becomes undeniable. Zoe's expression softened slightly as she continued. I want to be very clear about something. This isn't about seeking special treatment or privileges. This is about the basic dignity that every traveler deserves regardless of their appearance. She turned to a new slide showing a map of incident reports across the country. The Equal Skies initiative isn't about placing blame. It's about creating accountability and transparency. It's about acknowledging a problem that has been normalized for far too long. And most importantly, it's about finding solutions that ensure every passenger is treated with equal respect. Zoe then outlined her vision for change. First, we need comprehensive data collection and transparency. Airlines should be required to track and report incidents involving passenger removals, security calls, and credential verifications broken down by demographic information. Second, we need standardized bias-conscious training for all customer-facing airline personnel. Not just superficial diversity training, but deep ongoing education about how unconscious bias affects decision-making. Third, we need clear, consistent policies across the industry about when and how passengers can be removed from flights with appropriate checks and balances to prevent discrimination. And finally, we need accountability, real consequences when these standards aren't met. Zoe's voice strengthened as she approached her conclusion. Some might ask why this matters so much. After all, isn't this just about who sits where on an airplane? She shook her head slowly. No. This is about something far more fundamental. This is about whether we truly believe in equal treatment under the law and in public accommodations. This is about whether we're willing to acknowledge that dignity isn't a luxury amenity available only to certain passengers. The room was completely silent now, every person hanging on her words. I'm 17 years old. I shouldn't have to stand here explaining why I deserve to be treated with basic human dignity. No one should. And yet, here we are. Zoe looked directly into the cameras, her expression resolute but not angry. What happened to me was wrong, but what's happening every day to thousands of other travelers is equally wrong. The difference is that I have a platform to speak about it. I have resources to address it. Many others don't. She gestured to her father standing proudly at the side of the stage. My father built Meridian Airlines with a vision of connecting people and places with dignity and respect. That vision wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was a genuine commitment to treating every passenger as equally valued. Today, we're rededicating ourselves to that vision not just for Meridian, but for the entire aviation industry. Zoe's final words resonated throughout the room. This isn't about one flight, one airline, or one person. This is about creating a world where no one is made to bleed because someone decided they don't belong. Thank you." As Zoe stepped back from the podium, the room erupted in applause. Journalists who had come expecting corporate damage control were instead witnessing the birth of a movement led by a poised young woman whose dignity in the face of humiliation had transformed her personal pain into a powerful call for change. Even Jonathan Brooks, watching from the back of the room, could not help but recognize the shifting tides. This wasn't just another public relations challenge to be managed. This was a fundamental reckoning with practices that could no longer be defended in the light of day. And in that moment, as cameras captured Zoe's quiet strength and clear purpose, the aviation industry faced a choice: evolve willingly toward greater equality and accountability, or be forced to change by the undeniable moral clarity of a 17-year-old who refused to accept that some people didn't belong. The mahogany-paneled hearing room of the Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington, D.C. was filled to capacity. Government officials, airline executives, industry representatives, and media outlets had gathered for what many were calling the most significant aviation oversight hearing in decades. At the center of the room sat Judge Amelia Cortez, a distinguished 61-year-old jurist known for her razor-sharp questioning and no-nonsense approach. As the head of the special commission appointed to investigate discriminatory practices in the airline industry, she commanded respect from all sides. "This hearing will come to order," Judge Cortez announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Over the next several days, we will hear testimony regarding allegations of systematic discrimination in commercial aviation, with particular focus on practices targeting minority passengers." She surveyed the room with practiced authority. "I remind everyone that this is not a criminal trial but a fact-finding proceeding. Our purpose is to determine whether federal intervention is required to ensure equal treatment for all air travelers." In the front row sat Xavier and Zoe Williams, both dressed in conservative business attire. Behind them, Gabriela Hernandez and Michael Lawson conferred quietly over documents. Across the aisle, Jonathan Brooks and his legal team projected confidence, though the strain of recent weeks showed in the tightness around Brooks's eyes. "We will begin with testimony from Ms. Zoe Williams," Judge Cortez announced. Zoe approached the witness table with measured steps. After being sworn in, she recounted her experience clearly and factually, without embellishment or emotional flourish. Her composed demeanor lent additional weight to her account, particularly when she displayed photographs of her injured wrists. "And to your knowledge," Judge Cortez asked, "had you done anything to warrant being removed from your assigned seat or subsequently detained?" "No, Your Honor," Zoe replied. "I had a valid ticket proper identification, and I conducted myself courteously throughout the interaction. Thank you, Ms. Williams. You may step down." Next came Heather Donovan, visibly nervous as she took the stand. Gone was the confident flight attendant who had orchestrated Zoe's humiliation. In her place sat a woman clearly struggling with the consequences of her actions. Ms. Donovan, began the DOT's lead counsel, "Please explain the red flag system you referenced in your written statement." Heather leaned toward the microphone. It began as a legitimate security protocol for identifying passengers with restricted items or special handling requirements. Over time, it evolved into something different, a way to identify passengers who didn't fit what management called the premium profile. And what determined whether someone fit this profile? Heather hesitated. It was never explicitly stated in writing, but in practice it primarily targeted passengers of color in premium cabins. "Who directed you to implement this system on the day Ms. Williams boarded your flight?" "I received specific instructions regarding Zoe Williams the day before the flight," Heather testified. "Thomas Reynolds called me directly to emphasize that she should be monitored closely and moved from first class if any pretext could be found." The room stirred at this revelation. And Mr. Bennett's role, Richard Bennett, was placed on the flight deliberately. His job was to create a seat conflict that would justify moving Ms. Williams to economy class. When Thomas Reynolds took the stand later that day, his testimony contrasted sharply with Heather's. Immaculately dressed and speaking with practiced precision, he denied any coordinated effort to target minority passengers. Meridian Airlines, like all carriers, has legitimate customer service standards, Reynolds insisted. Any measures taken were about maintaining the premium experience our first-class passengers expect. Judge Cortez leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, we have reviewed emails in which you specifically discuss maintaining traditional demographics in premium cabins. What exactly did you mean by that? Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. That was taken out of context. I was referring to customer expectations and service consistency. Then perhaps you can explain this memo. Judge Cortez continued displaying a document on the courtroom screens. Here you write, and I quote, "The increasing presence of non-traditional passengers in premium cabins is affecting the comfort level of our core customer base." What non-traditional passengers were you referring to? Reynolds had no satisfactory answer. As the hearing progressed to its second day, Michael Lawson presented the statistical analysis derived from the Equal Skies database, now containing over 5,000 documented incidents. The pattern is statistically significant and cannot be explained by random variation. Michael explained, walking the commission through detailed charts and graphs. When controlling for all other variables, ticket class behavior attire passengers of color were 4.3 times more likely to be subjected to additional verification, 3.8 times more likely to be removed from premium cabins, and 5.2 times more likely to have security called for non-violent disputes. By the third day, Jonathan Brooks finally took the stand. His earlier confidence notably diminished. Mr. Brooks, Judge Cortez began internal documents from Pinnacle Airways outline what you called the Traditional Standards Initiative. Could you explain the purpose of this program? Brooks cleared his throat. The initiative was designed to maintain consistent service standards across our premium cabins. And yet, Judge Cortez countered the implementation guidelines specifically instruct staff to verify the legitimacy of passengers who appear inconsistent with the typical premium profile. Would you care to elaborate on what constitutes this typical profile? Brooks had no adequate response. The most damning moment came when the commission played a recording of a meeting between Brooks Reynolds and several Pinnacle executives discussing what they termed demographic management in first-class cabins. Our core customers are uncomfortable with the changing profile of premium travelers, Brooks could be heard saying. We need to protect the exclusive atmosphere they're paying for. When the recording ended, the room remained silent, the implications impossible to ignore. On the final day of testimony, Xavier Williams addressed the commission not as the CEO of Meridian Airlines, but as the architect of the Open Skies initiative. What we're proposing isn't revolutionary, Xavier explained. It's simply applying the same standards of transparency and accountability that exist in other regulated industries. Passengers deserve to know that they will be treated with equal dignity, regardless of their appearance. He outlined the initiative's three core components: data transparency, standardized training, and independent oversight. This isn't just a moral imperative, it's a business necessity. Xavier continued. As our society becomes increasingly diverse, airlines that fail to treat all passengers with equal respect will find themselves unable to compete in a changing marketplace. As the hearing concluded, Judge Cortez addressed the packed room. This commission will now deliberate on the evidence presented. Based on preliminary findings, I can state that there is substantial evidence of concerning patterns that warrant further investigation and potential regulatory action. She looked directly at the airline executives. The aviation industry has a choice. It can proactively address these issues through meaningful self-regulation and transparency, or it can wait for federal mandates that will likely be more restrictive and less flexible. With a final tap of her gavel, Judge Cortez adjourned the hearing, but its impact was already reverberating throughout the industry. The issues that had once been dismissed as isolated incidents or individual complaints had now been thoroughly documented and officially acknowledged. As Zoe and Xavier left the hearing room surrounded by their legal team, They knew that regardless of the Commission's final recommendations, a fundamental shift had occurred. The conversation about equal treatment in air travel had moved from the margins to the mainstream, from anecdotal grievances to documented patterns requiring systematic solutions. And for Zoe, watching as reporters clamored for statements from airline executives who had once dismissed her experience, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her dignity, temporarily violated but never surrendered, had catalyzed a change that would benefit countless travelers who would never know her name. The executive floor of Pinnacle Airways headquarters buzzed with unprecedented tension as board members filed into the emergency meeting. Security had been heightened, access restricted, and phones checked at the door, unusual measures that underscored the gravity of the situation. Jonathan Brooks sat alone at the head of the polished conference table reviewing dismal financial projections. Pinnacle's stock had fallen 27% since the beginning of the scandal, wiping billions from the company's market value. Major corporate accounts were threatening to switch carriers. Social media campaigns were calling for boycotts. The door opened and 12 board members entered, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. Brooks stood to greet them, mustering his most confident demeanor despite the circumstances. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "I know we face some challenges, but I believe we can weather this storm if we stand firm." "Save it," Jonathan interrupted Eleanor Blackwell, the board's senior member. "We've reviewed the quarterly projections. We've seen the DOT hearing transcripts. And we've read the lawsuit filings. This isn't a storm. It's a Category 5 hurricane of your making." Brooks stiffened. The situation has been greatly exaggerated by media coverage and Williams' grandstanding. The recordings aren't exaggerated cut in another board member. Your own words about demographic management and traditional profiles are damning enough without any media spin. Eleanor placed a document on the table. "We've drafted a statement announcing your resignation effective immediately. Thomas Reynolds has already been terminated. Richard Bennett was fired yesterday." Brooks's face flushed with anger. "You're scapegoating me to save yourselves. Everything I did was to protect this airline's premium brand and customer experience." "No," Eleanor replied firmly. "What you did was implement discriminatory practices that violated federal law, destroyed our reputation, and decimated our stock value. The only question remaining is whether you'll exit gracefully or force us to remove you." As Brooks realized the extent of his isolation, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. Xavier Williams was requesting an immediate meeting. "Williams wants to talk," Brooks announced, grasping at this unexpected development. "Perhaps there's a settlement opportunity." The board exchanged glances. "What exactly does he want?" Eleanor asked. "He didn't say," Brooks admitted, "but this could be our chance to contain the damage." After brief deliberation, the board authorized the meeting but insisted on legal counsel being present. 2 hours later, Brooks found himself in a neutral location, a private conference room at the Raleigh Convention Center, face-to-face with Xavier Williams. Xavier sat calmly on one side of the table, flanked by Gabriela Hernandez and Michael Lawson. Brooks entered with Pinnacle's chief legal officer and a crisis management consultant. "Thank you for agreeing to meet Jonathan Xavier," began, his tone professional but not warm. "Let's cut to the chase," Brooks replied tersely. "If you're looking for a financial settlement, we're prepared to discuss reasonable compensation for the unfortunate incident involving your daughter." Xavier's expression remained unchanged. "I didn't come here to discuss compensation. I came to offer you a choice." He slid a document across the table. "This is the framework for the Open Skies Initiative, comprehensive standards for transparency, accountability, and equal treatment across the entire industry." Brooks glanced at the document without touching it. "And what exactly are you proposing? Pinnacle Airways can be the second airline after Meridian to voluntarily adopt these standards," Xavier explained. "You can help lead the industry toward necessary change rather than being dragged there by regulators and lawsuits." Brooks scoffed. "You expect us to adopt your publicity stunt as official policy? Our shareholders would revolt." "Your shareholders are already revolting," Xavier pointed out calmly. Your stock has lost nearly a third of its value. Corporate clients are canceling contracts, and the DOT is considering formal sanctions. He leaned forward. This isn't a publicity stunt, Jonathan. It's a genuine effort to fix a broken system, and it's the only path forward for an industry that can no longer defend practices from another era. Brooks' legal counsel whispered urgently in his ear, but he waved her off. And if we decline your generous offer, then the lawsuits will proceed, Xavier replied matter-of-factly. Not just from Meridian, but from every passenger documented in the Equal Skies database who flew Pinnacle. The DOT investigation will continue without the benefit of your cooperative participation, and your competitors will continue adopting the Open Skies standards, while Pinnacle becomes increasingly isolated. The crisis consultant spoke up. Mr. Williams, surely there's room for compromise here. Perhaps a joint statement acknowledging concerns without admitting liability. This isn't a negotiation, Xavier interrupted. It's a choice between evolution and extinction. The world is changing. Passengers expect equal treatment regardless of their appearance. Airlines can either adapt to that reality voluntarily or be forced to change through litigation regulation and market pressure. Brooks studied Xavier's expression, searching for some sign of bluff or uncertainty. He found none. What exactly would adopting these standards entail? Brooks asked finally. Xavier nodded to Gabriella, who outlined the key requirements: transparent reporting of passenger removal incidents broken down by demographics, standardized bias-conscious training for all customer-facing staff, elimination of subjective passenger profile criteria, and regular independent audits. Implementation would be phased over 6 months, Gabriella explained. And yes, it would require acknowledging past practices that need to change. Brooks laughed bitterly. So you want us to admit wrongdoing, restructure our entire operation based on your standards, and subject ourselves to ongoing monitoring? I want the next generation of travelers to board planes without wondering if they'll be humiliated because of how they look, Xavier replied evenly. How we get there is less important to me than ensuring we do get there. An uncomfortable silence filled the room as Brooks weighed his increasingly limited options. His board had already made their position clear. The DOT hearing had revealed damning evidence. Public opinion had turned decisively against practices that couldn't be openly defended. I'll need to consult with my board, Brooks finally said. Of course, Xavier agreed, standing to indicate the meeting was concluding. You have 48 hours before we proceed with the next phase of legal action. As they prepared to leave, Brooks couldn't resist one final jab. This all started because your daughter had a bad experience. Isn't this overreaction just about a father's wounded pride? Xavier paused, turning back to face Brooks directly. No, Jonathan. This started because your airline implemented discriminatory policies that harmed countless passengers. My daughter simply had the platform to expose what many others couldn't. He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only Brooks could hear. And if you still think this is about pride rather than principle, then you've understood nothing about why you're in this position. The corporate showdown had reached its climax, not with dramatic confrontation, but with the simple presentation of an inevitable choice: adapt to a new era of accountability or be left behind by an industry and society that would no longer tolerate discrimination disguised as standards. As Brooks watched Xavier leave, he knew that regardless of his personal feelings, Pinnacle Airways would soon be implementing the Open Skies initiative. The only remaining question was whether he would be the one to announce it, or whether that task would fall to his successor. The battle had been decided not by corporate maneuvering or PR strategies, but by the moral clarity of a position that could no longer be publicly opposed. Every passenger deserved to be treated with equal dignity regardless of their appearance. And that principle, once fully articulated and backed by irrefutable evidence, had proven more powerful than decades of entrenched industry practices. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Zoe Williams's bedroom as she scrolled through news headlines on her tablet. 6 weeks had passed since her fateful flight, and today's top story marked a watershed moment in the aftermath. DIOT announces historic ruling. Airlines must implement anti-discrimination measures. The Department of Transportation's final report was unequivocal. The investigation had found substantial and compelling evidence of patterns of discriminatory treatment across multiple airlines. The ruling mandated comprehensive reforms closely mirroring the Open Skies initiative, including transparent reporting requirements, standardized training protocols, and independent oversight mechanisms. Zoe's phone chimed with a text from her father. "Turn on CNN." She switched to the news broadcast just in time to see Jonathan Brooks at a podium, his usual confidence replaced by a somber demeanor as he delivered a statement. "Pinnacle Airways acknowledges that past practices have fallen short of our responsibility to treat all passengers with equal dignity and respect. Today, we are announcing our full commitment to implementing the Open Skies standards across our entire operation." The camera cut to a panel discussion where analysts noted that Brooks would be stepping down as CEO once the transition was complete, ending a 15-year tenure that had once been considered exemplary. Another headline caught Zoe's eye. Former flight attendant Heather Donovan pleads guilty to civil rights violations. The article detailed Donovan's plea agreement, which included community service probation and her participation in a new industry training program about the impacts of discrimination in transportation. Her testimony had been crucial in establishing the broader pattern of deliberate targeting. Richard Bennett faced more serious consequences, criminal charges for conspiracy and making false statements to federal investigators. Thomas Reynolds had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency, revealing the full extent of the coordinated campaign against minority passengers. Zoe set down her tablet and moved to the window, watching birds soar freely across the morning sky. The swift and decisive resolution felt surreal after weeks of hearings, investigations, and public debate. Her phone rang. Elena Rodriguez calling with excitement in her voice. "Zoe, have you seen the news? It's happening. It's really happening." I just saw Zoe confirmed, smiling at her friend's enthusiasm. The Equal Skies database was cited 13 times in the official report. Elena continued. "They're calling it the most comprehensive documentation of transportation discrimination ever assembled." "That's because of all the people who were brave enough to share their experiences," Zoe replied. "We just provided the platform." After ending the call, Zoe checked her calendar. Her rescheduled Harvard interview was tomorrow, finally happening after multiple delays. She had completely revised her presentation, incorporating everything she'd learned through the Equal Skies initiative. What had begun as a proposal about engine efficiency had evolved into a concept for algorithmic detection of bias in service industries, a system that could identify potentially discriminatory patterns before they resulted in incidents like hers. Downstairs, she found Xavier in his home office reviewing documents with Gabriella via video conference. "The implementation timeline is aggressive, but achievable," Gabriella was saying. "All Meridian staff will complete the new training program by month's end." "And the transparency reporting?" Xavier asked. "First quarterly report publishes next week. We're setting the standard for what this should look like." Xavier noticed Zoe in the doorway and smiled. "I'll call you back, Gabriella. Zoe's here." After ending the call, he turned to his daughter. "Big day." "Big day," she agreed, settling into a chair across from him. "How are you feeling about all of this?" Xavier asked. Zoe considered the question carefully. "Validated," she finally said. "Not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever experienced what I did without having the resources to do anything about it." Xavier nodded. "The DOT ruling goes further than I expected. It's practically a complete adoption of the Open Skies standards." "That's because the evidence was irrefutable," Zoe pointed out. "Once everything was documented and presented systematically, they couldn't ignore it." "True," Xavier agreed. But evidence alone doesn't always lead to change. It took your courage to transform data into action. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating how much had changed in just 6 weeks. Sophia Torres called this morning, Xavier mentioned. The new passenger advocacy department has already handled over 200 cases. She's building something remarkable there. She was the right choice, Zoe affirmed. Someone who tried to speak up long before it was safe or popular to do so. Xavier leaned back in his chair. You know, when I started Meridian, I thought success would be measured in routes revenue and market share. I never imagined my greatest contribution would come from grounding the entire fleet. Sometimes progress requires stopping before you can move forward properly, Zoe observed. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Xavier checked his security monitor and smiled. It's for you. Puzzled, Zoe went to the front door. Opening it, she found Daniela Morales standing on the porch, a nervous smile on her face. Surprised, Daniela said. I hope it's okay that I came by. Your dad arranged it. Of course it's okay, Zoe replied, genuinely happy to see the friend she'd made through this ordeal. But why are you in Atlanta? Aren't you supposed to be in Boston? That's actually why I'm here, Daniela explained as they walked to the living room. MIT offered me the engineering scholarship. And, she paused dramatically, Harvard wants to interview us together tomorrow. Are both of us? They're interested in our joint proposal, the bias detection algorithm we've been developing through Equal Skies. They think it has applications beyond aviation. Zoe's expression brightened with excitement. What had begun as a personal project born from humiliation had evolved into something with far-reaching potential. Later that evening, as news coverage continued to analyze the DOT ruling, Xavier received a call from Nicholas Grant. Remarkable outcome, Xavier Grant said. The stock is up 12% since the announcement. Turns out doing the right thing can be good business too. It was never about the stock price, Xavier reminded him. I know that now, Grant acknowledged, and it's why Meridian will thrive long term. You've redefined what leadership looks like in this industry. After the call, Xavier joined Zoe and Daniela in the kitchen where they were preparing dinner together and discussing their joint presentation for Harvard. The key insight, Zoe was explaining, is that bias in service industries often follows detectable patterns that machine learning can identify before they result in discriminatory incidents. Exactly, Daniela agreed. The algorithm doesn't just react to problems after they happen, it helps prevent them by flagging potential issues in real time. Xavier listened, marveling at how his daughter had transformed a traumatic experience into innovation that could help others. As they continued their animated discussion, he reflected on how justice had indeed taken flight, not through vengeance or punishment, but through systematic reform that would benefit countless passengers who would never know the story behind the changes. The DOT ruling pinnacles transformation, the criminal charges against those most directly responsible, these were all important outcomes. But the most significant result wasn't measured in legal victories or corporate consequences. It was measured in the simple assurance that the next young woman of color who boarded a plane would be more likely to reach her destination with her dignity intact. And for Zoe Williams preparing for an interview that might never have happened without these events, that was the most meaningful justice of all. 3 months after the DOT ruling, the corporate headquarters of Meridian Airlines hummed with purposeful energy. The executive floor, once a traditional arrangement of closed offices and formal meeting rooms, had been redesigned with glass walls and collaborative spaces, a physical manifestation of the company's new commitment to transparency and open communication. Xavier Williams stood before a diverse group of 200 new hires, the first cohort to join Meridian since the implementation of the Open Skies standards. Unlike previous orientations focused primarily on procedures and policies, this session centered on the company's renewed values and vision. Welcome to the new Meridian Airlines. Xavier began, his voice carrying through the auditorium without a microphone. You're joining us at a pivotal moment in our history, a time when we're not just changing how we operate, but fundamentally redefining what an airline can and should be. He moved away from the podium, choosing to address the group more directly. 3 months ago, we made a choice to ground our entire fleet, rather than continue operating in a system that didn't treat all passengers with equal dignity. That decision cost us millions in the short term, but it has positioned us to lead the industry in ways that transcend traditional metrics of success. On the large screen behind him, images appeared showing the comprehensive changes implemented across the company. New training modules, redesigned customer service protocols, transparent reporting dashboards accessible to the public. Every one of you has been hired not just for your technical skills, but for your demonstrated commitment to treating all people with respect, Xavier continued. That's not an add-on or a secondary consideration at Meridian. It's the foundation of everything we do. In the front row, Sofia Torres watched attentively. At 32, she had never imagined she would rise from customer service supervisor to head of Meridian's new passenger advocacy department, a division that reported directly to Xavier and had authority to intervene in any situation involving passenger treatment. Xavier acknowledged her with a nod. Sofia Torres leads our passenger advocacy team. Her department isn't just a complaint handling unit, it's an integral part of how we design and deliver our service. When Sofia speaks, everyone listens, regardless of title or tenure. Sofia stood briefly, receiving warm applause from the new employees. Her department had already become a model for other airlines implementing similar structures. Our Chief Operations Officer, Gabriela Hernandez, will now walk you through the specific ways we've restructured our operations, Xavier announced, yielding the floor to Gabriela. Gabriela stepped forward, her presentation highlighting the practical implementation of Meridian's transformation. We've eliminated subjective criteria from all passenger evaluation protocols, she explained. Every decision affecting passenger experience must now be based on objective, documentable factors. She displayed a graph showing dramatic reductions in passenger removal incidents since the new policies had been implemented. This isn't just about avoiding discrimination, it's about providing consistently excellent service to every passenger, regardless of appearance, background, or travel history. Gabriela outlined the company's new mandatory training program, a comprehensive curriculum focused on recognizing and countering unconscious bias in customer service interactions. This isn't a one-time seminar or an online checkbox exercise, she emphasized. It's ongoing education integrated into every aspect of your professional development at Meridian. As the presentation continued, Xavier slipped out to take an important call. Nicholas Grant, speaking from New York, had exciting news. The scholarship program is fully funded, Grant announced. 20 full-ride scholarships annually for minority students pursuing careers in aviation, transportation engineering, and service design. That's fantastic, Xavier replied. Zoe will be thrilled. It was her idea, Grant acknowledged. The Meridian Future of Flight Scholarship will help ensure the next generation of industry leaders reflects the diversity of the passengers they'll serve. After ending the call, Xavier returned to find Gabriela concluding her presentation with a demonstration of Meridian's new transparency dashboard, a public-facing platform that tracked passenger service incidents by location resolution time and demographic data. This level of transparency is unprecedented in the industry, Gabriela noted. We're not just claiming to treat all passengers equally, we're proving it with data that anyone can access and verify. As the orientation session concluded, Xavier took questions from the new employees. A young flight attendant raised her hand. After everything that happened, weren't you worried about the financial implications of such dramatic changes? Xavier considered the question thoughtfully. There's a conventional wisdom in business that doing the right thing must come at the expense of profitability. Our experience has proven otherwise. He displayed the company's latest quarterly results, showing a 22% increase in passenger bookings and a significant gain in market share. It turns out that when you commit authentically to treating people with dignity, They reward you with their loyalty and trust. Another new hire asked about the industry response to Meridian's changes. Initially, there was resistance, Xavier admitted. Change is always uncomfortable, especially when it challenges long-standing practices. But the DOT ruling made these standards mandatory, and now most major carriers are implementing similar reforms, some more enthusiastically than others. After the session, Xavier met privately with his executive team to review progress on the company's transformation initiatives. The employee demographics report is particularly encouraging, noted the head of human resources. Our recruitment of minority candidates for management positions has increased by 64% since we revised our hiring practices. Michael Lawson provided an update on the industry impact. 7 major carriers have now formally adopted the Open Skies standards. Even Pinnacle, under their new CEO, is making significant strides. Sophia Torres shared feedback from recent passenger surveys. The most striking finding is the increase in first-time premium cabin bookings from minority travelers. People who previously avoided these spaces due to concerns about treatment are now choosing Meridian specifically because they trust us to respect their dignity. As the meeting concluded, Gabriella stayed behind to speak with Xavier privately. "There's one more thing you should know," she said. "Heather Donovan has completed her community service requirement and the bias education program." Xavier nodded. "And she's requested to meet with you," Gabriella continued. "She says she wants to apologize in person and share what she's learned." Xavier considered this unexpected development. "Schedule it for next week," he finally decided. "Reconciliation is as important as accountability." Later that evening, Xavier called Zoe at Harvard, where she was now in her first semester studying aerospace engineering and computer science. "How's the transformation coming along?" she asked after they'd caught up on her classes and activities. "It's remarkable," Xavier replied honestly. "When we first grounded the fleet, many thought it was an overreaction. Now it's seen as the defining moment that changed the industry. And the Equal Skies platform, over 10,000 documented experiences now," Xavier reported. "The DOT is using it as a benchmark for measuring improvement across all carriers." Zoe was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't been your daughter," she finally said. "If I had just been another passenger without the resources to fight back." "That's exactly why these changes matter," Xavier replied. "Because dignity shouldn't depend on who your parents are or what resources you have. It should be the baseline expectation for everyone." After their call, Xavier stood at his office window looking out at a Meridian aircraft taking off into the evening sky. The company logo, a stylized wing, had been redesigned with subtle colors representing diversity and inclusion, a small but meaningful symbol of the larger transformation. What had begun as a response to his daughter's humiliation had evolved into something far more significant, a fundamental reimagining of what air travel could and should be. And while the journey was far from complete, Meridian Airlines was no longer just transporting passengers from place to place, it was helping to carry an entire industry toward a more equitable future. The autumn leaves created a tapestry of gold and crimson across Harvard Yard as Zoe Williams made her way toward Pierce Hall for her long-awaited scholarship interview. Nearly 4 months had passed since her original appointment, an interview she never reached because of handcuffs and false accusations. Today she walked with quiet confidence, dressed in a tailored navy suit with her mother's pilot wings pinned to the lapel. The scars on her wrists had faded to thin white lines visible only if you knew to look for them. Professor Elizabeth Chen, head of the Aerospace Engineering Department, greeted Zoe warmly in the conference room where 4 other faculty members waited. "Ms. Williams, we've been looking forward to this meeting for quite some time." "So have I," Zoe replied with a small smile, unpacking her materials with practiced efficiency. "Before you begin, Professor Chen said I want to acknowledge that your original presentation on next-generation propulsion systems was already impressive. But we understand you've developed a completely new proposal since then." "Yes," Zoe confirmed. Recent events led me to reconsider the most meaningful application of engineering principles to current challenges. She connected her laptop to the room's display system, bringing up the title slide, Algorithmic Detection and Prevention of Service Bias in Transportation Systems. For the next 30 minutes, Zoe presented her concept with poised clarity. She explained how the same engineering principles used to identify inefficiencies in mechanical systems could be applied to service operations, creating an algorithm capable of detecting patterns of bias before they resulted in discriminatory incidents. The system works by analyzing multiple data streams in real time, Zoe explained, displaying a complex flowchart. Booking patterns, seat assignments, service requests, complaint resolutions, all examined for statistically significant variations that might indicate bias. Professor James Wilson, a specialist in machine learning, leaned forward with interest. "You're essentially creating an early warning system." "Exactly," Zoe agreed. Rather than addressing discrimination after it occurs, this approach helps prevent it by identifying potential issues before they affect passengers. She demonstrated a prototype using anonymized data from the Equal Skies platform, showing how the algorithm could have flagged concerning patterns on multiple airlines months before specific incidents occurred. What's particularly powerful, Zoe continued, is that this approach doesn't require proving intent. It focuses on outcomes and patterns, making it more effective than traditional compliance measures that often rely on proving deliberate discrimination. As she concluded her presentation, Zoe acknowledged the personal experience that had inspired this work. 4 months ago, I was removed from a flight and handcuffed until my wrists bled because someone decided I didn't belong in first class. That experience showed me how engineering principles could be applied to solve problems beyond mechanical systems. The room was silent for a moment as the professors absorbed both the technical brilliance and personal significance of her work. Professor Chen broke the silence. "Ms. Williams, you've taken what must have been a traumatic experience and transformed it into innovation that could help countless others. That speaks volumes about your character as well as your intellect." The questions that followed were challenging but engaging, exploring technical aspects of the algorithm, potential implementation challenges, and broader applications beyond aviation. "Have you considered how this could be applied to other service industries?" asked Professor Morgan, who specialized in public transportation systems. "Absolutely," Zoe replied confidently. "While the prototype is calibrated for aviation, the framework could be adapted for any service environment where bias might affect customer treatment, hotels, retail healthcare, even educational admissions." After nearly 2 hours of presentation and discussion, Professor Chen brought the interview to a close. "Thank you, Ms. Williams. This has been one of the most impressive scholarship interviews I've witnessed in 20 years at Harvard." As Zoe packed up her materials, Professor Wilson approached her privately. "Your work bridges technical innovation and social impact in a way we rarely see," he commented. "Have you considered publishing your methodology?" "It could benefit the entire field. I'm actually working on that with Daniela Morales," Zoe explained. "She's developed complementary algorithms at MIT focusing on institutional data analysis." Outside Pierce Hall, Zoe took a moment to absorb what had just happened. The scholarship interview that had been the original purpose of her flight 4 months ago had finally occurred, but in a completely different form than she had planned. What would have been a technically impressive but conventional presentation on propulsion efficiency had evolved into something far more meaningful and potentially impactful. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "How did it go?" "Really well," she replied. They seemed genuinely interested in the practical applications. As she crossed Harvard Yard toward her dormitory, Zoe reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. The humiliation of being handcuffed and dragged through an airport had been transformed into purpose and innovation that might help prevent others from experiencing similar treatment. Her phone rang Daniela, calling from MIT. "I just finished my presentation too," Daniela exclaimed. Professor Ramirez wants us to submit our combined algorithm to the National Transportation Innovation Competition." "That's amazing," Zoe replied, genuinely excited. Their collaboration had grown from sharing similar experiences to developing complementary solutions that worked better together than separately. "He says our work could set a new standard for how bias is identified and addressed in transportation," Daniela continued. "Not just in aviation, but across all modes of transit." As they discussed next steps for their project, Zoe felt a sense of purpose that transcended her original academic and career goals. She had come to Harvard to study aerospace engineering with dreams of designing more efficient aircraft. Now she was helping to ensure that those aircraft would carry all passengers with equal dignity and respect. Later that evening, Zoe received an email from Professor Chen. The subject line simply read, "Congratulations." Opening it with slightly trembling fingers, Zoe read, "The Scholarship Committee has unanimously voted to award you the Fuller Engineering Excellence Scholarship for the duration of your Harvard career. Additionally, we would like to provide research funding for your bias detection algorithm project with potential implementation partnerships through our Transportation Innovation Lab." As she absorbed this news, a second email arrived, this one from Dean Roberts, head of the engineering school, Ms. Williams, beyond the scholarship decision. "I wanted to inform you that your presentation today has sparked significant discussion among our faculty. We are exploring the creation of a new interdisciplinary concentration in ethical engineering systems, inspired in part by your innovative approach to applying engineering principles to social equity challenges. We would value your input as we develop this program." Zoe sat back in her chair, momentarily overwhelmed by how far things had come from that terrible day at the airport. What had begun as a personal humiliation had catalyzed not just industry-wide change, but potentially academic innovation as well. She called her father to share the news. "I'm so proud of you, Xavier," said his voice thick with emotion. "You've taken something painful and transformed it into something that will help others for years to come." "I had a good example to follow," Zoe replied softly. After their call, Zoe stood at her dormitory window watching planes trace white lines across the darkening sky. Each aircraft carried hundreds of passengers, people with their own destinations, dreams, and dignity. Thanks to the changes sparked by her experience, more of those passengers would reach their destinations without having their dignity compromised along the way. The scholarship was meaningful, the research opportunity exciting, but the knowledge that her work might prevent others from experiencing what she had endured, that was the true victory. In transforming her pain into purpose, Zoe Williams had discovered something profound. Sometimes the most important journeys aren't about reaching a destination, but about changing the way everyone travels. 6 months after the DOT ruling, Zoe Williams stood at the podium in the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., addressing a gathering of industry leaders, government officials, and transportation advocates. Behind her, a large screen displayed the Equal Skies logo alongside statistics showing dramatic improvements in passenger treatment across all major airlines. Today marks 6 months since the implementation of the Open Skies standards. Zoe began, her voice confident and clear. In that time, documented incidents of discriminatory treatment have decreased by 72% industry-wide. Passenger satisfaction scores among minority travelers have increased by 38%. And perhaps most significantly, first-time bookings in premium cabins by passengers of color have risen by 54%. The audience, a diverse gathering that would have been unimaginable in aviation circles just a year earlier, listened attentively as this poised young woman, now a freshman at Harvard, outlined the transformation their industry had undergone. "These numbers tell an important story," Zoe continued, "but behind them are real people who can now travel with the dignity and respect that everyone deserves. People who no longer have to dress up to avoid scrutiny. People who aren't asked to verify their tickets multiple times because they don't look like they belong in certain spaces. In the front row, Xavier Williams watched his daughter with quiet pride. Beside him sat Gabriela Hernandez, now promoted to President of Operations at Meridian, and Sofia Torres, whose passenger advocacy department had become a model for the entire industry. Elena Rodriguez, who had begun as a witness to Zoe's mistreatment and was now Director of Data Analytics for the Equal Skies Foundation, managed the live dashboard showing real-time statistics from participating airlines. The aviation industry has always prided itself on innovation, Zoe noted. From the Wright brothers to supersonic flight, we've constantly pushed the boundaries of what's possible in the air. Today, we're applying that same innovative spirit to how we treat the people inside those aircraft. She highlighted the technology now being implemented across major carriers, including the bias detection algorithm she and Daniela Morales had developed, which was being piloted by 5 airlines, including a reformed Pinnacle Airways under new leadership. This isn't just about avoiding discrimination, Zoe emphasized. It's about creating a travel experience where everyone feels equally valued and respected, where your dignity isn't determined by your appearance, background, or the color of your skin. As Zoe concluded her address, Department of Transportation Secretary Williams took the stage to present the first annual Transportation Equity Achievement Award to Meridian Airlines for its leadership in implementing the Open Skies standards. Meridian didn't just comply with new regulations, the secretary noted. They established a new paradigm for the entire industry, demonstrating that treating all passengers with equal dignity isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. Good. Xavier accepted the award with characteristic humility, acknowledging the collective effort that had made these changes possible. This recognition belongs to everyone who refused to accept discrimination as normal or inevitable. From the passengers who shared their experiences through Equal Skies, to the employees who spoke up about problematic practices, to the regulators who held our industry accountable. He paused, looking at Zoe, and most of all to those who maintained their dignity even when others tried to take it away. Following the ceremony, attendees explored an exhibit chronicling the transformation sparked by Zoe's experience. Glass cases displayed artifacts from the journey: Zoe's torn boarding pass with its revealing red mark, Heather Donovan's signed testimony about the flagging system, printed excerpts from the Equal Skies database, and the DOT's historic ruling. Near the exit, a wall of screens showed video testimonials from travelers whose experiences had improved under the new standards. "I flew first class for the first time in my life," shared an elderly black woman. "No one questioned why I was there. No one asked to see my boarding pass twice. I was simply treated like any other passenger with respect and courtesy." A Latino business executive described a similar shift. "For years, I wore a suit when flying just to avoid extra scrutiny. Last month, I traveled in jeans and a t-shirt and was treated exactly the same as when I wore business attire. That's real progress." Among the most moving testimonials was one from Heather Donovan herself, who had completed her community service and now worked with the aviation industry's new bias education program. "I was part of a system that judged people based on appearance rather than treating everyone with equal respect," she acknowledged. "Working with this program has shown me how unconscious bias affects decision-making, and how systems can either reinforce or challenge those biases. I can't change what I did, but I can help ensure others don't make the same mistakes." As the exhibition concluded, visitors encountered a simple but powerful installation, a pair of first-class airplane seats side by side. A plaque beside them read, "Who belongs here? Everyone with a valid ticket." Outside the museum, Xavier found Zoe speaking with a group of high school students who had recognized her from news coverage. "You changed everything," one young girl told her admiringly. "My mom says she used to be nervous about flying first class, but now she doesn't worry anymore." Zoe smiled. "That's what matters most, that people can travel without that extra burden of anxiety." As the students departed, Xavier approached his daughter. "The Harvard semester ends next week, right? Will you be flying home, or should I send the company jet?" Zoe grinned. "Dad, What have we been working for all these months? I'll fly commercial just like everyone else." "First class?" Xavier asked with a knowing smile. "Of course," Zoe replied, "with my valid ticket and all the dignity that comes with it." Later that evening, as they shared dinner at a quiet restaurant near the National Mall, Xavier raised his glass in a toast. "To transformation of an industry and of ourselves." Zoe clinked her glass against his. "And to all the people who will never know our names, but who can now fly without fear of having their dignity violated." As they enjoyed their meal, Xavier's phone buzzed with a notification. The Wall Street Journal had just published a major analysis of the aviation industry 6 months after the Open Skies implementation. Equal treatment better. Business. How aviation's equity revolution improved the bottom line. The article detailed how airlines adopting the new standards had seen increased customer loyalty, reduced complaint handling costs, and significant growth in previously underserved market segments. It turns out Xavier read aloud from the article that treating all passengers with equal dignity isn't just ethical, it's profitable. By eliminating discriminatory practices that discouraged certain travelers from booking premium services, airlines have expanded their customer base while building stronger brand loyalty. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. That's the lasting impact when doing the right thing becomes the standard way of doing business. As they looked out the restaurant window toward the illuminated monuments of Washington, father and daughter reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a traumatic experience for one teenager had catalyzed changes that would benefit countless travelers for generations to come. And for Zoe Williams, now recognized as a leading voice in transportation equity. Despite her youth, the most meaningful victory wasn't the awards or recognition. It was knowing that somewhere at this very moment, a young woman of color was boarding a flight without fear of humiliation or harassment, simply taking her rightful seat with all the dignity she deserved. That was the true lasting impact, not just policy changes or technological innovations, but the fundamental shift in how people experienced the simple human right to be treated with respect, regardless of how they looked or where they sat. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the terminal at Boston Logan International Airport as Zoe Williams checked in for her flight home. 1 year had passed since the incident that had transformed both her life and the aviation industry. Now a sophomore at Harvard, she had just completed a successful semester, developing her bias detection algorithm into a full-fledged system being tested by transportation providers nationwide. Window or aisle preference? Ms. Williams asked the gate agent, smiling warmly as she processed Zoe's first-class ticket. "Window, please," Zoe replied, noticing with quiet satisfaction that her boarding pass emerged from the printer without any special marks or codes. As she made her way through security, Zoe observed subtle but significant changes from a year earlier. TSA officers now wore body cameras with visible indicators showing they were recording. Signage displayed clear information about passengers' rights and the complaint process. Most importantly, the random screenings now appeared genuinely random rather than targeting specific passengers based on appearance. Reaching her gate, Zoe settled into a seat and opened her tablet to review research data. Her algorithm had identified a 94% reduction in potentially biased incidents across participating airlines over the past year, with Meridian Airlines leading the industry in equitable treatment metrics. Zoe came a familiar voice. Looking up, Zoe was surprised to see Heather Donovan standing before her, no longer in a flight attendant's uniform but dressed in business casual attire. The woman who had once humiliated her now appeared hesitant, almost vulnerable. "I thought it was you," Heather continued. "I'm speaking at the Transportation Equity Conference tomorrow. I work with the industry training program now." Zoe nodded, maintaining her composure. "I've heard good things about the program's impact." An awkward silence hung between them. The former flight attendant who had instigated a crisis and the young woman whose dignity had remained intact despite it. "I never properly apologized to you," Heather finally said, her voice sincere. Not directly. What I did was wrong on every level, and I'm truly sorry. Zoe studied her for a moment. Thank you for saying that. The most important thing is that the system has changed. It has, Heather agreed. And I spend every day trying to ensure others don't make the same mistakes I did. She hesitated before adding, Your algorithm is helping with that, identifying patterns before they become problems. Their conversation was interrupted by the boarding announcement. As passengers lined up, Zoe noticed the diverse mix of travelers in the first-class lane, a visible change from a year earlier when such spaces had been far more homogeneous. Boarding the aircraft, Zoe was greeted by a flight attendant who showed her to seat 2A without a second glance at her appearance. The normality of the interaction, being treated like any other first-class passenger, represented exactly the progress they had worked to achieve. As Zoe settled into her seat, she noticed Heather being seated several rows behind her in economy. Their eyes met briefly across the cabin, acknowledging the journey that had brought them both to this moment from very different starting points. The flight attendant approached with a pre-departure beverage. Welcome aboard, Ms. Williams. Can I offer you something to drink? Water would be great. Thank you, Zoe replied. As the attendant served her drink, Zoe noticed the small pin on her uniform, the open skies symbol that had become the industry standard for commitment to equitable treatment. It wasn't just Meridian anymore. Every major airline had adopted these standards, some more enthusiastically than others, but all accountable to the same metrics and transparency requirements. Zoe's phone chimed with a text from Xavier Safe Travels. Harvard confirmed they'll implement your algorithm across their transportation and service systems next semester. The ripples continue to spread. She smiled, typing back, one system at a time. See you tonight. Looking out the window as the aircraft prepared for departure, Zoe reflected on the year that had passed. Her algorithm was being implemented beyond aviation in hotels, public transportation, and even healthcare settings. The Equal Skies Foundation, now with Elena Rodriguez as its executive director, had expanded its mission to document and address discriminatory treatment across all modes of transportation. Most significantly, the conversation about dignity in travel had fundamentally changed. What had once been dismissed as isolated incidents or individual complaints was now recognized as a structural issue requiring systematic solutions, and those solutions were working, changing not just policies and procedures, but the lived experience of millions of travelers. As the aircraft lifted into the clouds, Zoe thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she had boarded a flight to a scholarship interview she would never reach, handcuffed until her wrists bled because someone decided she didn't belong. Today, she flew as a recognized innovator whose work was helping ensure no one else would experience that same humiliation. The scars on her wrists had faded to nearly invisible lines, but the impact of what had happened that day continued to expand in ways she could never have imagined. The flight attendant approached again. Ms. Williams, the captain asked me to give you this. She handed Zoe a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for making the skies more equal for all of us. Your work has changed how we fly and how we see each other. As the plane soared higher, Zoe watched the landscape below transform from distinct buildings and streets into a seamless tapestry where individual differences blended into a harmonious whole. It was, she thought, the perfect metaphor for what they were working to achieve, a world where diversity was recognized and celebrated, but never used as a basis for unequal treatment. In that moment, looking down at the world from 30,000 feet, Zoe Williams understood that true justice wasn't about punishment or retribution. It was about transformation, creating systems where dignity wasn't determined by appearance, where belonging wasn't questioned based on skin color, and where everyone could move through the world with the fundamental respect they deserved. As the aircraft banked gently toward its destination, Zoe smiled at the simple truth that had emerged from her painful experience. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't outrage or vengeance, but the quiet, persistent work of building something better. And in that work, she had found not just purpose, but peace. If you've ever been treated unfairly because of how you look, this story is for you. It's a reminder that dignity isn't a privilege. It's a right that belongs to everyone. Our world changes when brave individuals stand up and refuse to accept injustice as normal. Thank you for watching this powerful story of transformation. If you believe in equal treatment for all, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire change and remind us of our shared humanity. Remember, sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't loud protest, but the quiet, determined work of creating lasting change. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve.
Прямо сейчас Тудрон сыграется в К-10.
Юка у меня вмятина. А чё у тебя с носом? А мне что мне с носом? Мне бутылку въебали стеклянной. Не знал? Вареников? Да. Ебал мне нахуй. Да. Я такого не сделал. Блядь, ебать малина вкусная, сука. Бля, ебать интересно заруба. Слышал? Один из самых темных. И по медикам, и по игре. Ничего забить не могу, блядь. Очком меня Миша 2 раза уебал нахуй. Сука, 2 раза меня в очко уебал. Блядь! Заебало меня уже.
Я поехал, брат, увидимся.
Давай. Что делаете? Интересно? Это ваша малина, да, была? Пойдёт, забрала. Привет.
Извини, можно сфоткаться?
Здорово, тиктокер.
Что там, Ля?
Что делали ночью?
Кайфовали, жесть.
Давай, да.
Почему?
Я с вами, берите меня с собой кайфовать.
Клянись. Газ делали? Она разработает что?
Да?
Да.
Вот, Сашу берем.
Нет.
Не?
Но ты со своим самоваром хочешь чай пить?
Ну, откуда самовары?
Ну вот и не надо. Со своим самоваром кто чай ходит пить?
Ладно. Так, ну я пытался, короче. Не получилось. Куда мы собрались?
Мы гулять в компьютерный клуб.
В компьютерном клубе. Ладно, пойду я. Оставлю вас.
Куда?
А?
Куда пойдешь?
Куда к своим?
Слышь, ты задышал прям, да?
Тяжко, брат, очень. Конечно, я, блядь, нихуя не бегаю даже.
Слышь, пошли.
А? Там есть вон у пацанов.
Где?
Наш.
Есть?
Слышь, ночью идем кайфовать?
А?
Кайфовать идем ночью?
Да, куда?
Хорошая вертикальная атака.
Я пошел.
Опасные моменты. Заблокирован удар на спички. Капитан Спичка включается и начинает забивать. В тот момент, когда его команде важнее всего.
Давай, играй, блядь! Играй, нахуй!
Испугался я. Снимай, пацаны. Я испугался. Меня сам выпустит 0-1-0. А он бы тут бегал вот так, туда-сюда.
Вот здесь, да?
Минус Сабина плюс Саша. Какая Саша? Вы что пишете? Я. Ой. Не видишь, видит.
Передача на Ману. Не получилось пробить.
Спокойно, пацаны, спокойно. Ай! Ой, бля! Это был пиздец. Бля, опасно, братишек. Сейчас.
Давай, на.
Блядь! Давай, Миша, делай. Давай, Миша. Все, Миша настроился, видно по нему. Понял? Вот он когда ловит волну. Все, смотри, пошел.
Два выхода пенальти.
Давай, Миша, я.
Президентский пенальти. Михаил Литвин идет сравнивать счет.
Я присяду?
Чаек будет, брат?
О, а где вы такое берете?
Садись.
И отсюда.
Давай, брат, садись. Давай.
Ой.
Что там пишет?
Верят, Миш? Конечно.
Я не верю.
Ты как вообще? Ты как вообще?
Завал Булснер. Дернет в первом тайме.
Красавец, что даешь.
Спасибо, Даша.
Президент Литвин может сравнять счет в этой игре.
Давай. Хорош! Хорош, бля! Красава.
Я помню, мы делаем 1 на 1 между вами. Помню, в сетях мы
Давай.
зарубились.
А он же мертв. Делаем?
Конечно.
На чё?
Я на лысо, ты бороду. На лысо.
Николай Саныч, иди сюда, здесь спор интересный, иди сюда.
Привет,
Мое почтение.
Спасибо. Как дела?
Ты, конечно, человек,
Интересно
да.
не со спортивной точки зрения, тут понятно.
Спор есть. Они посоревнуются в челленджах, потому что они на просторах интернета зарубились, как я понял.
Да.
Было же такое, Стас?
Да,
Я же не
было,
обманываю.
С кем, с кем?
А?
Со мной.
Рошан против, да,
Он
Станислава.
бреет бороду, если я выиграл. Я брею волосы на лысо. Челленджер.
То есть кто-то из вас будет похож друг на друга.
Да.
Так, ну что, мы как площадка с удовольствием.
Да,
Да?
мы все, мы стали площадкой для споров. Вчера вот Сабира
Давай,
с Столом.
давай, наши до финала доходят. Перед финалом, перед игрой 1-1 выходим.
Давай.
Давай?
Давай. Ну, если вы даже до финала не дойдете, а хотя
Не,
бы
не,
до
да
полуфинала
это ладно,
дойдете,
если.
то матч за третье. Я к тому,
Ну,
что право раньше.
финальной части.
За третье пусть там разогревают.
Согласен.
Мы перед финалом.
Все.
С кем?
С кем мы будем в финале?
Судрот.
Все, парни, я
Так
в деле.
интереснее.
Я в деле.
Он в
Так,
теме,
понял? Так просматриваем больше.
Нет, ну давай так.
Они не
Нет,
выйдут,
человек,
братан.
который сейчас Анара стульчиком посадил, может. Ты видел повтор?
Да, это я еще устал.
Он в пике, понял, стульчик сделал, и Анар нырнул. Да, стульчик вот так вот.
На самом деле он в туалет ходил.
На поле нельзя.
Можем, ну,
нельзя
я аккуратно. Когда на твоем стадионе, когда будем играть?
25 апреля, брат, старт
Поздравляю,
сезона.
поздравляю с
Спасибо
стадионом,
огромное.
реально.
Спасибо,
Круто,
спасибо,
реально.
это важно для нас
Надо тоже
самих.
свой стадион сделать.
Я
Потом
газон
маленький.
клал.
Не, снег на нем колол.
Снег колол.
Чтобы растаял быстрее.
Все, мы с тобой забились.
Некит идет биг-бургер.
Бургер! А,
Если что, можешь потом, ну, типа, я скажу, что да, ты заболел.
да,
там,
так,
ну,
чем придумал,
я не стригся, ты без волос не очень.
Да, без бороды тоже так, кстати.
Красными мячами. В этом заключается бургер. Ассистирует Максим Фролов.
Хорош. А кто бьет? Как думаете, забьет, не забьет, забьет, не забьет? Ауру сделайте, чтобы не забил, пожалуйста.
Я слышу болельщиков, но не всех болельщиков тут рот.
Давай, Сэма.
Давай, Сэм.
Сэм 0-1-0, давай. Нет, Сура, делаешь, Сура. Сура, делаешь. Ай, блядь. Хорош, блядь.
Бля, на мою лысину. Как я уже старый.
Ой, нас снимали, что ли, на видеокамеру? Че, 4-4, да? Решающий гол, надо. 1. А когда будет красное время? Будет красное? 2 мяча здесь.
Да.
Да?
Есть же, да, альфа-тайм?
Альфа там будет?
Они на уменьшение сейчас
блядь.
пойдут.
Под него!
Ой! Ой!
Звездок контратака.
Спокойно. Здорово.
Здорово, Чижа!
Ой, пацан, пропал интернет в моменте, прикинь. Хорош! Да, не свистят, прикинь. Что? Да, там второе нарушение дают.